Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday so far. We're looking forward to talking about all the latest in Star Wars news, as well as addressing your guys' questions, comments, concerns, theories, anything you'd like to send into the chat. So make sure you fire in those questions into the chat room. Right now, it is the rare no pre-show chat so far, which is not a common occurrence for us. We always love those pre-show chats, but we now have a completely open chat room for everybody. So if you'd like to send in your chats, make sure you do so in there. If the chat room does start stacking up and you don't think you could get a chat on tonight's stream, maybe you show up a little late or you have a pressing one you've got to send in before the stream wraps up, make sure you send in that super chat. It helps out our channel and it bumps you up to the top. We will guarantee to answer all super chats by the end of tonight's stream. Also, you can join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs. If you do so, if you join at the $5 tier or higher, you do get priority chat access. There are two ways to access that are if you're on YouTube, you can already access that via the features on in the chat room. If you are on Patreon, you can either message us your YouTube handle on Patreon, comment it on the post you see on Patreon, or send us a DM or comment on the post itself for the stream tonight. You will only see tonight's stream posted on Patreon if you are of that tier. So if you're wondering, that's how you will see this specific link. And then, with that being said, make sure you hit that like button. Helps our channel out immensely. And subscribe if you are new. If you're just joining us or you're watching us on replay, we do this every week, every Tuesday, talking about the latest Star Wars news, as well as taking your guys' questions. So make sure you join us every single week, even if you are just discovering tonight's show. You can fire in as many questions as you want. Have a pressing Star Wars question, DC, Marvel, Fantastic Four just came out last week. Anything you'd like to discuss, send it in to the chat. We're going to talk about the latest Star Wars news tonight, and that is going to mostly center around stuff from Comic Con. As many of us have known for a while, 2025's Comic Con was not going to be one with an impressive amount of news from the big studios that are usually there: Star Wars, Marvel, DC. There wasn't much that came out of those big platforms, but Star Wars did have a little bit of news, including some of the topics we're going to be talking about tonight, as you see in the thumbnail. The release of a new promo image for Ahsoka Season 2, really the first official promo image for Ahsoka Season 2, as well as a new promo image for Maul Shadow Lord. And of course, publishing, as Comic Con used to be, primarily publishing, Star Wars publishing still did deliver with some announcements at Comic Con. Maybe not as many as we got in Star Wars Celebration, but we still did get the announcement of a new novel, as well as some new comic books, some updates on stuff like the Revenge of the Sith Anniversary Edition that's coming out. We have the Mandalorian visual guides, a lot of things to talk about in that realm as well. All right, let's get into the first topic tonight here, and that is going to be the new images from Ahsoka Season 2 and Maul Shadow Lord. So we got our first promo image of Ahsoka Season 2, and it is a promo image of Ezra in full New Republic garb. He's got like a bomber jacket on and New Republic style. Looks very good. It looks just like he should. Eman Esfandi did a great job with Ezra in season 1 of Ahsoka. What you think of the season as a whole or not, I thought he was definitely one of the standouts for the casting between Rebels into live action. I thought he did a great job of bringing Ezra to life. Looks just like him, and I think plays the character with that same enthusiasm and spirit that you see in the show. So it's really cool getting to see Eman Esfandi as Ezra here. One thing though, it definitely crystallizes, and we both saw the leaked trailer for Ahsoka that they put out at Celebration, which was not necessarily a trailer, but kind of a Clone Wars style, like war reel recap thing that they put out with a lot of concept art. But in that, they did show that we're still touching on the Thrawn plot. We're still touching on New Republic. We're still touching on Hera and Ezra and Chopper and all those characters. So this isn't a shock, but it does reaffirm the fact that Ahsoka season 2 isn't going to just be Ahsoka only. Like, I know I personally was kind of hoping it would be. It's still going to be the entire Rebels New Republic cast of characters here. and Eman Esfandi returning as Ezra, apparently playing some type of role in the New Republic, probably obviously teaming up with Hera. It only makes sense. But Sonic, what were your reactions to this new image from Ahsoka season 2?
I mean, it's nice to see a little bit more of the classic Ezra look. I think the whole bearded look, having all the Imperial dog tags kind of as his armor, it worked. But it worked as someone who's, kind of been foraging, scavenging, beating up all these troopers, possibly killing them for survival. So I thought that made sense. I think it still can imply a little bit more of a heavier, darker past, and this is him kinda almost, like, reclaiming, like, "Oh, I was part of the Rebel Alliance. Now this is me stepping into New Republic leadership and what I can mean to the galaxy, what I can mean to this government, what I can mean to my friends and family who have waited so long for my return." And, I think he probably had access to something close to a razor, but he probably just chose not to. Now that he's in the galaxy, he's like, "Alright, sure, why not?" And I think it's a nice look. I'm just a little surprised that he's kinda going for almost like a Han Solo Episode 5 look to me, and a little bit more of like an Andor jacket look. I was kinda hoping for something that would blend in a little bit more of the Rebels aesthetic, and then what he had on Peridia. I'm not opposed to it by any means, because I do like the hairstyle. I think the hairstyle works, and there's a lot more emphasis on you can see the scars from when he first faced off against the Grand Inquisitor, so, like, stuff like that is cool. The contacts don't necessarily look anywhere near as blatantly, like, big and large, like, they're still there. They're still not like, true irises, but they do seem a little smaller. I can see them possibly even playing around a little bit more just to make them seem a bit more natural. Kinda like how we've seen Ahsoka with her M Montreal/Leku slash look Leku from Mandalorian season 2 to where she was by Ahsoka season 1, just how different and how improved that had become. Especially with this still being a show that presumably is ending with its season 2, and then these characters probably jump ship more into the movies and stuff that are gonna come out. This feels like a nice little final, like, testing stage of like, "Yeah, it'll be pretty good for streaming, and then we'll master it, and by the end of the show's run, and then bring it out for when they make their appearances in live action films that are gonna be released in theaters." So yeah, it's pretty cool. Looks like he's definitely on home one or something, so he's probably sticking around with Hera and Jason. Definitely looking forward to seeing the Jason dynamic for sure. I think that'll be very interesting to just see, the adopted son, the first son of Hera and Kanan, and the actual son of Hera and Kanan, how that dynamic works. I'd love to see what he gets up to with Chopper. Want to see Zeb obviously show up because now we know that there's going to be stories told in the New Republic space, so it just makes sense to, like, kinda bridge all these characters that we know are gonna also possibly show up in Mandalorian and Grogu, so, yeah, it'll be pretty fun, it'll be pretty cool. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a picture, you can't get too much more past that, but I'm excited always. Amonis Fondi was not necessarily, like, someone we all thought about as, like, being Ezra because he was virtually unknown. I forget the actor's name who was in Aladdin live action, but he was fan
Mhm.
cast all the time. He was vouching for it, and when this guy got cast, it was like everyone's like, "Oh," and then they see the picture and they're like, "Oh, yeah, no, that's literally live action Ezra." And he's definitely, really played to the strengths of the character. He's brought his own energy to it. He's the most seamless live action transition, honestly, so I know it's hard to compare that to, like, an Ahsoka with Rosario kinda having all the little makeup and prosthetics on compared to just a human, but, yeah, I mean, he was a highlight, and if not the top highlight, top 3 highlight of Ahsoka season 1, so if we have to jump between our main galaxy and everything happening Peridia, and he gets to be our central focus, him and, like, Hera, yeah, I do not mind that at all, especially with the chance that he can kinda fill in and kinda take over that leadership role.
Yeah, definitely. I think seeing him play, because Ezra's the main character basically of Rebels, so seeing him play back off of every character from Rebels, really so far, all we've seen are Ahsoka and Sabine. Seeing him with the more familial unit of Hera, of Zeb, who he has a lot of fun with in the show, that should make for a much more lighthearted side to this. I'm interested to see how they pair that with the Thrawn stuff, maybe taking in some of the criticisms from season one as well. Like trying to make Thrawn a little bit more ruthless, a little bit more dominant than he was in season one of Ahsoka. now that he has his full forces, now that he's been to Dathomir, all this type of stuff. How will we see that compare? Filoni, teased a lot of stuff back in Celebration, including Akbar maybe being in the show and stuff and going up against Thrawn and that type of stuff. So it's like there's stuff to see here on all sides. I'm just once again worried they're going to stretch this too thin. Hopefully, these episodes are longer, kind of more in the Andor vein, the 45 to 55-minute range instead of the 30 to 40-minute range that we've seen so much with season one and also with Disney Plus in general. But yeah, I mean, this is exciting to see regardless because I think he was one of the standouts of season one and looking forward to seeing him again. But speaking of another singular image, let's talk about the Maul Shadow Lord image that they released. This one almost offers even less than the Eman Esfandi one. It's kind of just a very cool promotional image of Maul, beautifully lit, and obviously shows off once again the incredible Clone Wars animation style that only is getting better and better. And here we get to see it again now with even 5 years on from Clone Wars season seven, Maul looking just even more ferocious and scary than he ever has. He is wearing the same outfit that he wears in the end of the Clone Wars season seven, so this might be right at the beginning of the show. We've both theorized and talked about and had questions about on the channel. Where does Maul Shadow Lord take place? Is it a post Bad Batch thing? And I kind of was hoping it would be a little bit post Bad Batch so that it would kind of slowly creep throughout the dark times as we get closer to maybe that 10 BBY range where you have the Obi-Wan show and you have Solo, a Star Wars story, and you have a lot of things around that time. That's kind of the point that opens up the entirety of the dark times to that more anthology style show that we could possibly get in the future where you have just kind of everyone, right? You've got a Han Solo, you've got a Boba Fett, you've got Darth Maul, you've got some early Rebels characters, maybe with like a younger Kanan and Hera. You've got maybe a Star Killer that if you want to throw them in there. You've got all sorts of things from Legends and canon that just kind of all branch around that middle of the period, that 10 BBY period. So I was hoping Maul would be maybe 18 to 17 BBY from this image, unless he just, like most Star Wars characters, doesn't change his clothes very often. This might be either flashback or right around that 19 BBY time period. I wouldn't be shocked if it starts there. Maybe season one starts there and we branch off into a new year every year with further seasons. I'm interested to see how many seasons this show is planned for or intends to go. I think Amal show already has a much more fervent fan base than the Bad Batch ever had when they announced that show. So if that went 3 seasons, you'd kind of hope that Maul could go 3, 4, 5 seasons by himself. And I think there's enough story with where he ends up in Solo that you could build 10 years worth of really cool material here for Maul. And make it a 5, 6, 7 season show if you really wanted to, if it becomes a big hit. But yeah, this image is just really cool. It reminds me a little bit of the way it's lit. It reminds me a little bit of those like old early 2000s Unleashed figures that they used to put out that were just kind of more realistic designed versions of the animated drawings and stuff for the characters. It's a if you were alive during Attack of the Clones promo, you probably remember those pretty well. But yeah, it just looks really cool. But Sonic, what were your thoughts on the new Maul image?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's even less to glean from here because it's just Maul striking a classic Maul pose with his lightsaber. I think the one thing that was pretty interesting is like it does seem like there's almost like heat kind of coming off of him, like he's in some sort of like generator room or something. So it'll be very interesting to see how much the Shadow Lord really operates in quite literally the underworld, the belly of all these different institutions and all that. Especially since he is, for all intents and purposes, like dead to everybody. He's dead to the Sith. He's dead to the Jedi stragglers. He's dead to the Empire, to the Republic. Like, if he really wanted to, he could also be dead to Shadow Collective, that the remnants of it. So I do agree on your point that like maybe we do get to see something like flashing back to just right after, like what happens. Where does he first escape to? At the end of the Siege of Mandalore arc. I'm not so sure it's necessary though, because I think he's a character that, like, has kind of many gaps and just picking 'em up, like, in the flow of things, like, what's coming next for him, like, oh, he's already struck down somebody, he's already bartered some deal. I think that'd be pretty cool. He is, like, one of those characters where what, like, we're seeing in, like, superheroes, for example, we don't need to, like, run through his origin again. We've seen so many versions of it by now that it's almost like everyone kinda just assumes, like, yeah, he's gonna do something that might be different than what we expect him to, but then within, like, 2 minutes, it just feels like Maul, like, perfectly like Maul, right? So, it'll be pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, again, the biggest thing about the show is, like, presumably Talon kind of being brought into canon and in this time period of all things. I do still prefer it happening after Bad Batch just to, like, let him kind of be on the run a little bit. If we do have flashbacks, I would love to see him kind of reconnect a little bit more to the Dathomir backstory and everything that, like, Rebels kind of plays off with, like, that whole episode where, the old Night Sister magic possesses everybody, like Sabine and Ezra and all of that. Like, there is some very strong connections to Mother Talzin and everything that once he kinda leaves her, right, and once he's with Savage, you don't really touch on it, and then when he returns in Rebels, like, after his second appearance, it's like, "Oh, that's big," like, he has a throne for that and his dark saber and everything. I'd love to see those connections be made, and it'd be a good way to like, how we've seen in Tales of the Underworld with Asajj Ventress to now be able to get at least, like, some cool scene from Son of Dathomir animated. Talzin's not dead per se, like, she is dead in the physical corporeal form, but as we've seen in season 6, she can still kinda manifest, she can still kinda do things. She might be dead, but compared to, like, an Asajj Ventress kinda coming back from out of nowhere, right? Like, you're okay, like, why is this happening? She has a lot more reasons to kinda show up or at least be, like, some almost, like, dark spiritual voice for him, and I think that'd be a pretty
Mhm.
great way to, like, at least give us some glimpses into the past, into the things that we never unfortunately got animated because of the Clone Wars' cancellation once the Disney deal happened, but yeah, definitely excited for the show, like you said, it's gonna have a bigger audience from the start, but yeah, we'll see if it'll maintain it, how long it's gonna be, and if they're just gonna try to, like, wrap up all the stuff leading into Rebels before an anthology show can really start balancing off, like, the purely original trilogy characters that are, like, closer to 5 years and before, like, just like where Andor is starting at.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where this could really take us, right? If you have the clone aspects all ironed out by Bad Batch, or started at least by Bad Batch, and then you have the underworld starting to get hashed out here. We kind of already know what the Jedi kind of are doing at this time a little bit, between a lot of the comics we've had, between some of the Vader material we've had, between the oh god, I was just blanking on what I was gonna say. But yeah, we an Obi-Wan show, excuse me. The Obi-Wan show mixed with all that other stuff. We know a lot of what happens in the first 10 years between all the different factions, but the underworld is the main one that, like, somehow we go from an underworld that's dominated by Maul to eventually an underworld that's pretty much dominated by the Hutts. And we see him seize control of a lot of the underworld in the Clone Wars, but there's he's flat on his face at the end of the Clone Wars, right? So how does he rebuild and turn what was the Shadow Collective into the ultimate Crimson Dawn? And I think there's a big story there. And for those people who want, Solo 2, this is kind of a Solo prequel in a lot of ways if they do it right and they can get enough seasons to really build into that story. You could absolutely do that true connection. And then when you get to that anthology show, then you can have really a lot of Solo 2 type stuff with Han, Orlando, and stuff building off it. Kira story, transition points between Solo and Rebels. So there's a lot to be done here with Maul's story. Very excited to see what happens. But what do you guys think? Let us know what you think of the new images. I put up a poll here in the chat. If you guys want to respond to that as well. Which show are you more excited for next year? Ahsoka Season 2 or Maul Shadow Lord? And right now, 60% of you are saying Ahsoka Season 2, 40% saying Maul Shadow Lord. So it is pretty close between the two. I don't know. For me personally, I'm right in between. I can't, it's hard to pick. I think Ahsoka Season 1 had its moments to where it was what I wanted. It had other moments where it left me a little flat, including the last couple episodes weren't quite as good as I was hoping it would round out to be. But still, there's so much I'm already emotionally attached to with the Ahsoka character, with the Rebels characters. I'm very interested in where they're going with the Thrawn plot and the rest of the New Republic. But where the Maul show, even though I feel like we're going to get a lot more about the Maul character and some of this more dark time stuff, it's an era and a period we've seen a lot before. But I just feel like also I know the Maul show will probably be really good to great. So I'm gonna say I'm a little more excited for that right now, but obviously a trailer for Ahsoka season 2 eventually will probably change my mind. But what about you, Senek? Which one are you more excited for?
I'm still gonna say Ahsoka. I think I it Maul's a character that I didn't necessarily need to come back, right? Like, his end in episode 1 could have been fine. He's turned into a fascinating character, but I've already seen his end in Rebels, right? If anything, what still appeals to me more is the Crimson Dawn stuff that is, like, left behind by Solo Star Wars story. I wanted to see what him and Kira kinda got up to, what would transition to her and when she's kinda brought back in the comics between episode 5 and 6, and, what that power change looked like, what her role might have been in leaving him on Malachor, if it was like a duel with Vader and stuff like that. Those are the things that I kinda wanna, like, be like, "Oh, yeah," like, that's still more immediate for me. But it's the talent thing, right? I'm like, "Oh, this could be" if you write a good story around her, I think there could be something very genuinely intriguing, and with him being a Sisyphus character, with things going wrong all the time despite how much he builds himself back up again and again and again, it's like, okay, is it like that she, like, is killed off like Savage is? Like, are we gonna repeat that same beat, or is she gonna betray him and kinda try to take over and try to kill him? Like, there can be some very interesting things, and she's not gonna be Talon as Star Wars Legacy fans remember her being, right? I mean, honestly, I was never a huge fan, it was just the fact that they all had cool tattoos. She's barely wearing anything. She's with Cade Skywalker, like, as his master/lover for the comic run, and she's acrobatic, sure, but we've seen that from, like, Aayla Secura, we've seen that from other Leku and Montreal characters, so I that's the thing, like, I don't know how much they're gonna be able to balance what's new and inspired by Legacy and what, like, people are almost, like, expecting, like, some of those diehard fans. And if there's even gonna be talent, are we just kind of being baited into this feeling of, like, that we're finally gonna get George Lucas's idea of bringing up Talon Whitmall just in canon in this Dark Times period? And that's the thing that makes me go, like, I don't know, I really need to see just what exactly the focus of the show is gonna be. Are we really gonna go on a more, like, dark side spiritual journey with these 2 characters? Or is it gonna be, like, crisscrossing between him building out Crimson Dawn and everything there, right? So or is it, like, gonna be each season has something else? Like, I don't really know, and I think it's just the unknown is exciting for me, but I don't know if I how many story beats will feel too familiar to me, and I think that's what's kinda throwing me off. But Ahsoka, I'm like, yeah, I wanna see these characters, like you said, I'm emotionally invested. And I think the bigger thing for me is, like, at this point, it does seem like Ahsoka season 2 will probably be the end of the show, so it's gonna have its own definitive conclusion. The New Republic stuff seemingly will flesh out all the backstory that'll be like, kind of semi-recapped in Mandalorian Grogu and ensuing films, right? So, this is a good way to, like, get some meteor moments there while we're, catching up with Ezra and maybe implying and connecting a little bit more heavier stuff that happened to him on Peridia and just the state of the galaxy, what Maul and not Maul, what Thrawn has been able to do, the Shadow Council before, like, maybe he makes a cameo in the movie and stuff, right? Like, ideally, Disney is moving away from you need to know the streaming stuff to understand what's going on in the movies, right? It like you said before on a stream, it seems like Mandalorian Grogu is like a semi reboot. Like, yeah, if you watch the show, great. If not, we're gonna like get you a blend of all the vibes, maybe some of, like, the story beats start off from where we left off in season 3, but otherwise it should feel new and fresh. I figure whenever these characters start popping up in the sequel to that or, like, having an Ahsoka movie or whatever, it's gonna be the same way, so this is now the time to just, like, get your streaming audience familiar so that way they show up ready, and then your general audiences are like, "Okay, I got that recap, that's good enough, my friend told me a couple of things were Ahsoka season 2, I can just check some clips, bam, right? So, I think that it seems like I'm talking business more than anything else, but I do like, having Star Wars fans be informed, and especially for a show that's been criticized as like, "Oh, you need to watch 4 seasons of Rebels, blah, 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 this and that." Like, this is a good chance to be like, "Nah, you just kinda need to see some of the New Republic stuff and then be ready for Mandalorian Grogu." This gives you all the context you really need for the state of galaxy. Now we know how many years it's been since Mando season 1, etcetera, right? So, that's appealing to me, and at the end of the day, there's just so much in the Dark Times era already that it's not that I'm not excited for it, it's just like, how much more can we flesh out there?
Well, and that's the biggest reason I even hesitate with Maul. I'm still gonna lean Maul. That's the biggest reason I hesitate is just because I am kind of tired of the Dark Times. I just feel like Sith related stuff, dark side related stuff, personally, is always the most intriguing to me. Um, but I think it really is the Mandalorian Grogu that is mostly tempered my expectations or excitement for Ahsoka, is just because Ahsoka season one just felt like it was building to be this huge, massive thing for the Star Wars lore, for Star Wars itself. And now it feels like because they want to now shift this to film, a little bit of my I don't necessarily have concerns about the show because I think Dave Filoni has like a minimum level of quality. You're either into Dave Filoni's style of storytelling or you're not. And I've overall been into it. I think he has a minimum level of quality to where it will at least be interesting and compelling. Will the story necessarily be as cohesive or perfectly told as possible? That's where you could run into flaws. I think there can be technical or filmmaking flaws, but ultimately the care he'll give to the narrative will be there. It's just a matter of whether 8 episodes is enough to tell a story for Dave Filoni. And right now, I don't think Ahsoka season one had enough episodes or enough time. It was definitely a story that was bigger than he wanted to show. There was a lot of pacing issues in that show. And so I'm worried a little bit with season two because I feel like season two was maybe supposed to culminate in a movie, but now I'm a little bit worried that it's going to, like you said, wrap up the Ahsoka series, but it still has all these other things going on. Like I would be a lot more confident if they said, yeah, season two is going to be Ahsoka, Sabine, Shin, and Balin, and that's it. And we'll get to some of the other stuff maybe a little bit later in the show. But I just am very unsure about the constantly cutting perspectives back and forth between galaxies and seemingly between two very different plot lines between possible Mortis stuff and the escape from Peridia, and what Balin's doing and all of that that's set up, and the plot line of Thrawn versus New Republic and classic original trilogy style, Empire versus Rebellion battles. Like I'm very, very nervous about the way it's going to be all structured. So I think that's what's pulling me back a little bit from being like fully over the moon for Ahsoka season two. But Filoni always does a great job with his trailers, and so I'm sure we'll see a trailer and I'll be like, "Oh man, this is it. This looks awesome." And I'm still very excited for Ahsoka season two. It's just not. I think Maul's going to just be a little bit better, so I'm a little bit more excited for that. But what do you guys think? Let us know why you prefer Ahsoka or Maul. Right now, it's gotten a little bit tighter, 57% for Ahsoka season two, 43% for Maul Shadow Lord. So you guys are kind of right down the middle with that split here. But again, we have reached about the 30-minute mark in our stream. Make sure you send in your questions. If you have any questions, comments, theories, anything you want to chat with us about, now's your time to do that. Send it into the chat. Send us your questions, anything you'd like to discuss. It doesn't have to be about Star Wars as well. It can be about anything you want. Send it into the chat and we will answer your questions tonight. We're going to go about an hour and a half for our show, so make sure you do so. Let's move on to some of the other news out of Comic-Con. And we did get some publishing announcements, which was pretty exciting. We are entering the back half of publishing already for the year. The year is over halfway over, which is kind of crazy. 2025 is flying by as every year does. But we had so much announced from publishing in both Star Wars Celebration last year, in April, D23 last year, Comic Con last year. Like we've known a lot about what's coming with publishing recently, but it's all been for this year. And we finally got our first announcement for our first book of 2026. And it is going to be, and we're going to talk a little bit about Outlaws a little bit later, but it's an Outlaws prequel book. And I have a lot of thoughts on that, but it is uh, Low Red Moon, and it's a prequel book about ND5 and Jalen from the video game. So if you played the game, ND5 is the big commando droid from the Clone Wars that helps you on your missions, and then Jalen's the guy who loans him to you and ends up, having a bigger role in the game than you first thought. So the positive for me, the most exciting part about this announcement is that it's being written by Mike Chen, who wrote Brotherhood. And Brotherhood is consensus one of the best books in Star Wars canon. Most people have it in their top 10. And I think for almost everybody, it would probably at least be top 15 canon books. It is a very, very good character study for Obi-Wan and Anakin, really in a time period that needed a seminal story for canon, and it does a great job of really transitioning their relationship, something that people have complained about for a decade or more, between Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars 3D animated show that we see. They're so different than they are in the original Clone Wars multimedia project. How do we make that transition? And that book did a great job of showing how Obi-Wan and Anakin make that transition to brothers versus the father-son relationship we see more in Attack of the Clones. So that's a positive. Low Red Moon being written by Mike Chen. The negative is I just feel like this is once again just like this tie-in material is way too late. We just have currently the Acolyte second book just came out today. We had the previous Acolyte book come out, and no one cares. We haven't heard, like, nobody's talking about it. Nobody, we usually, get pretty decent viewership on our book reviews for newer adult novels, and generally a lot of enthusiasm on our channels. We've always been a book channel. No one cared about the Acolyte Wayseeker, and nobody seemingly cares at all about Crystal Crown. There's still a subsection, obviously, about of Acolyte fans who will, and there will be still a subsection of Outlaws fans who will care about this. But I just fear that no matter how good the book is, it's too little too late, because the game is all but dead. This will be a year and a half after the game came out, and over 6 months to 8 months or so since the last DLC came out. So I just find the release around this baffling personally. But like, why could this not have fit somewhere in the middle of this year, or end of this year, or even beginning of this year? But alas, that's whatever. I'm just hoping the book is good. And with somebody like Mike Chen, obviously that's a huge first step, because Mike Chen is definitely a highly acclaimed Star Wars author. I think he'll do a fantastic job with this story. Will the story be important enough, or will you care enough about the characters or the subject matter to make what he could possibly do with it stand out? That remains to be seen to me. But I'm nonetheless now, like, if my enthusiasm was rated out of 5, I'm about like a 3 now, where I would have been about maybe a 1 or 1.5, just because Mike Chen's writing it. So I don't know, Sonic, what are your thoughts on Outlaws Low Red Moon being released next year? It's our first 2026 Star Wars book. And do you think it's a mistake to release Outlaws content a year and a half after the game came out?
Short answer is yes. Like, it just I mean, even the way they spread out the DLC, you could argue is like, okay, like there's one DLC in the late fall, early winter period, and then there's one that came out like 2 months ago, right? And I get it, like DLC takes time and all that, but they're not even like massive DLCs. You could have honestly packaged them as one, put more marketing behind it, and then have a tie-in book at the same time. And yeah, maybe you don't get as long of a window, but you probably get way more surge of interest, and game of the year editions or just like, discounted editions, including season pass and all that would probably work. I mean, we already talked about it on the last stream. Ubisoft CEO is like, "Oh, it's the Star Wars IP being damaged and all that." No, it's more like the Star Wars IP not putting stuff out to ensure synergy. I think that's more than anything that's gonna hurt it. Because if any subset of Star Wars fans has always been consistent through ups and downs, always been the publishing side. It's always been the adult books, and Yeah, I mean, we've it's not like Mike Chen is just like a throwaway author, right? It's not like when we got Wayseeker where as massively important as Justina Ireland was, she didn't really write any like big adult novels since Last Shot, right? And it's more of like her just getting ownership back of what we got with Vernestra and Acolyte and being like, "Okay, let me kinda bridge it, but also, like, not really between those characterizations," right? This is an author that in 2023, after everyone saw the panel with him and Adam Christopher, right, for Shadow of the Sith, Kirsten White for Padawan, right, Beth Revis for what we saw with The Princess and Scoundrel, people were just excited. Like, it wasn't just us, like, being at Celebration and seeing that, people were excited. There was a lot of momentum behind all these authors. They have all kind of established footholds, right? And they're like, "Yeah, we wanna see what's next for them." And Mike Chen, he had a bit of an envious cast. He doesn't really have a lot of story to work with, but not only does he, like you say, like, really redefine the transition from the Padawan and master relationship to brotherly Jedi Knights, so masterfully, he also is like, "Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Stower's Revenge of the Sith novel. I'm gonna make sure that this could be a version that works with it, or this could be the definitive version for you, and there won't be anything super contradictory there, and you can appreciate it that way," right? And this is clearly a guy who can work in the margins and make some incredible storytelling. I mean, he managed to fit in so much with the Padme and Anakin relationship, right? And the transition post their marriage to the early days of the war there. Managed to basically canonize so much of O3 Clone Wars' first couple episodes with like Mace Windu and Dantooine and all this and that, right? Like that's some cool stuff there to just basically be like, "Yeah, that's canon." And then he ended the book being like, "Oh, yeah, like, the Republic Militarization Act of, like, the Jedi and why they wear armor and everything when we see them in '08 Clone Wars." Like, he managed to bridge everything. He managed to make everybody happy there. So it's like, you've got an accomplished writer who not only captures the feel of the characters, but he can work between the margins, he can connect all the dots as needed. Yeah, people are gonna love that. And you're putting him on an Outlaws book? Okay, sure, but why didn't it come out when like, within the first 2, 3 months? Right? Why didn't it come out last winter when people are like, "Oh, it's the holiday season, let me buy it for Black Friday. Oh, and there's this book that's gonna come out next month, so, it'll probably keep me preoccupied as I play through the game," right? Um it's a bit of a shame. I mean, it sucks that, like, Andy, as fun of a character as he is, he doesn't really get too much either in the main story. It really does feel like the DLCs are starting to try and, like, make him more of a character instead of just a plot device by the end of the base game. This would've been great. This would've been like, okay, like, you can understand a little bit more what he's referring to, all that, like, it doesn't have to be a massive story. But, yeah, I don't know. It's a choice not only to do this, but to make it a prequel. I think if anybody needs to read anything Outlaws related, they wanna see what leads to them next, like, what's another big score that they go on to, what is the evolution of their
Mhm.
dynamic, what does K turn into by the time the New Republic comes about, and it's a free for all essentially, like, you're gonna be pulled pushed and pulled in every single way instead of just operating with all these underworld syndicates during the time between episode 5 and 6. There's not stuff you necessarily have to do directly leading into a post Battle Jakku, post Battle of Endor era, but you can at least start getting those steps there. And, even if the cancellation of the next game happens or not, like you're like, okay, but no, we've gotten some story for these characters for other authors, like in comics or something, to pick up on, right? Where they don't have to really do massive legwork. They've already got a foundation set. So that's my biggest issue. I don't mind getting to know a little bit more about Jalen and ND. I think that's an interesting dynamic to flesh out more, especially with how much of a twist it is in the game and all. But it's like I would rather focus on what's next for these characters, especially
Yeah.
after how disappointing Battle Scars was. Like Battle Scars for that Jedi Fallen Order to Jedi Survivor gap, like it was hype, right? We were so hyped. We should have been a little bit concerned when we saw Rebels art for the fifth brother, but then realistic looking art for Marin and for you know uh, Cal. It was like okay, whatever. Didn't seem like they were putting too much attention, but it's a cover's a cover. Here, they have a cool cover, they have a cool name, but I'm like, "Is that gonna sell anything?" No, if you've had these characters jumping between the past and present, maybe past and near future, I think that would be a great story, but if it's purely a prequel, I think you're wasting a lot of Mike Chen's talent, like, he's a guy I wanna see flesh out dynamics, not necessarily fill in, like, the whole point
Yeah.
of the Anakin Obi-Wan transition is that we don't really truly see it in canon, right? We've seen it in the comics from Republic, we've seen it in '03 Clone Wars, but for canon junkies, you haven't had anything, and he not only managed to write some really new interesting things, build on the Padme relationship, but also was like, "Oh, everything is kind of canon in a way, and everybody is gets, has their cake and eats it too," right? And it was great. So why not just do that here with the characters of K and D, Nick's like it's I don't know. It seems like a waste of his talents. I want him to have a meteor book. Adam Christopher's got a Master of Evil. Why does Mike Chen end up getting what arguably is gonna be an even smaller story than what we got with Brotherhood? So
Yeah.
it's frustrating. Just I don't understand. It's not just the release. It's just why this.
Yeah, I'm with you there for sure because simultaneously, while Mike Chen makes me now at least semi enthused for this book because his name is on it, it is disappointing that his next book is something like this when really, like Adam Christopher seemingly got to, he should have pick the litter of his stories, whatever he would want to tell. I feel like they would be down for, but maybe he was so enthralled by ND and Jalen that he wanted to write a book about him. And if that were the case, then I would imagine this would be better than if they said, "Hey, here's a lot of money. Please write a book about this because we need a tie-in to Outlaws," which is more likely the case, I would imagine. But yeah, I just think this story in general is just you could have it two ways. Like you said, Battle Scars is the video game tie-in we've gotten in Star Wars canon that has fallen flat on its face. Inferno Squad, which I would put more in the range of Outlaws of like book I did not need at all nor want, but read and ended up thinking was actually really, really, really good. It was, I think, more in the line of Outlaws, like higher quality author. I didn't know anything about Sam Maggs before she did Battle Scars, so we didn't really know, how to judge her quality of work, but knew Christy Golden's work and knew it was excellent. And so going in from Christy Golden to Inferno Squad, even if it was a book I didn't care about at all, ended up actually being worthwhile. Outlaws Low Red Moon might be something similar. Don't care about this at all. Mike Chen, though, could elevate it and turn it into something that's really, really good. I think it does have a cap, kind of like Inferno Squad did for me, have a little bit of a ceiling. Like it couldn't get it couldn't be one of the best Star Wars books ever because I didn't care about the characters before, I read it. And it made me care about them. So that, I mean, that's a huge step up already, but it kind of had this like memorability cap. Like it wasn't going to last forever in your mind because the characters aren't that important. And I feel like this is kind of that same direction where it's going to be hard for, even if this is great, hard for you to ever remember Outlaws Low Red Moon as one of your favorite things that's come out in Star Wars canon because you don't have that much attachment to the game unless you are somebody who's a big Outlaws fan. Personally, I am not. I have not revisited the game since early September last year. So it's been something that's been completely out of my mind for over almost a year. And by the time this comes out, a year and a half. I don't know if this is the right time to release this, but we can only hope that it is good. And hopefully, maybe it gives us all a reason to go back to Outlaws if we enjoyed it enough and replay that story. The other thing they announced in terms of books at Comic Con, these were not fully announcements because we knew this was coming, but they detailed a little bit more about the Reign of the Empire trilogy. And we have Reign of the Empire Book 2 coming out next year and Reign of the Empire Book 3 coming out in 2027. We already knew this, but we didn't know what the titles were going to be. They have now confirmed that the second book of the trilogy is going to be Reign of the Empire, Edge of the Abyss, and that is written by Rebecca Rowanhorse, which we already knew. And then the final book will now be called Reign of the Empire from the Ashes, and it will be written by a new Star Wars author, Fran Wild. Now, the other big thing they revealed is the timetable for these books. We kind of assumed, or at least I'll speak for myself, I kind of assumed these would be beginning of the year every year for the next 3 years. stories like Mask of Fear was. It was a February release. We are getting Edge of the Abyss in fall 2026. So I'd imagine that's October or November based on Lucasfilm Publishing and Random House World's traditional slate for drops for their last adult novel of the year. It usually is like first week of November or mid October. Last year, Glass Abyss. I wanted to say Shattered Abyss. Glass Abyss from Ace Windu was mid October. This year, with the Darth Vader book, Mask of Fear, it is coming out beginning of November. So I'd imagine it's in that timetable. And then for summer 2027, we'll be getting the final book of Reign of the Empire from the Ashes. So it will be kind of each season of the year, we're getting one of these Reign of the Empire books. Sonic, quick thoughts on the titles for the last two. And we also got a little bit more information on the second one. It's going to take place a year before the events of Andor season one. So it is jumping significantly in time from the first book, which took place like right after Revenge of the Sith. What are your thoughts on some of the new information we've learned about the Reign of the Empire trilogy and its release dates?
Yeah, I mean, I am a bit surprised that they're jumping straight to like the Andor period. I think there's ironically not any story dead in the middle of the Dark Times era, so I thought this would be great for a character like Saw to really unravel per se. But then it also does make sense because it does seem like more closer to the proper rebellion happening. That's when he is elevated. He isn't just another, rebel cell. He is more of like a dude to remember and everything going on there, right? And he is stable by his, relatively poor standards, right? So, and I thought especially after Andor season 2, what how little we actually did end up getting of him. I was like, yeah, maybe we're gonna just spend more time with him and how he grows and how he's changing, right? I mean, I guess technically if the time I don't know the exact timeline because I've never read the book, but the Jyn Erso, isn't she dumped by Saul like a year before Andor or what somewhere around there?
Yeah, it's right around
Yeah.
that time. Yeah.
So I think that this could be good knowing that context. It could be like you could really see why like the walls are closing in on him. You could understand a little bit more like why does he start getting on the rhydonium gas and everything. I'd love to have a little bit of an explanation for the line like she's my sister when he's talking about the gas. Like is that like a way for him to almost connect to his sister and see her like in like, hallucinations and all that? I'd like to kind of play with his psychology here because we've already seen plenty of him activity wise, but maybe this is like a chance for us to kind of see, how he's balancing his mental between, leading a growing and more extremist rebel cell. He does stuff and the Princess Leia young adult novel, right, with Claudia Gray bombs Naboo and all that. It's not like he's unopposed to doing some crazy stuff. That's not really the question of the character now. I think it's more just like what's going down with him? Like, what's going down in his head? Like, why is he pushing away Chin? Why is he pushing away everything? Why is he by the time we see Luthen meet up with him, like, just like, "Ah, everybody's a waste." Like, what's happening there? This is a guy who's interacted with Bale, who has connections with Mon Mothma. He should be almost like a tertiary lead. How much does he hold that? Alright, how much space does he hold there before it all starts crumbling? Or does he have moments where he almost is dropped way earlier, but then just the nature of everything so disconnected, he always kinda springs back up. I'd love to see that be explored with how close it is to Andor. I'd love to see, like, more of his dynamic with Jyn, especially because she's always been a character I know her book has gotten good reviews, I think you've read it before, but I
Mhm.
still think she is relatively underdeveloped. Like, just what was she like fighting under Saw as opposed to just what was like the last few months that she had under Saw? Right? I'd like to know like what is so special about their relationship? What is so special about his connection with her father? Right? Like, I want to know these things. I want to know how the Kyber chase has been looming in the background and growing more and more without him himself, despite all his paranoia, fully realizing how important it's gonna become, right? Like, that was something I felt if we had 3 seasons of the Andor show, maybe his final season is more about the obsession about Kyber and attacking everything on Jedha, and he's like, "Oh my god, everything in Rebels, everything's all connecting, it's finally coming through of I'm piecing it together before everybody else does, even though it kinda all happens at the same time." this would be a good chance to at least, get that push ahead too. There's a lot of story beats that I think this book can still do a quasi and/or season 2, season 3 if that had ever happened just a little earlier, right? So, I'm excited about that for sure. The 3rd book, I don't know. I mean, is it gonna be right after Jedha is destroyed? Is that what the name implies there? Or is this gonna be, like, that after the ashes of the Death Star, right? Is this something that could possibly be, like, the days post-Empire? And we've seen some pretty interesting stories already be told in this, like, very early post Death Star destruction, but it's mostly been comics. Like, this would be a great chance to kind of take this level of Andor-esque storytelling about the grays of the galaxy, and how does that continue when we know that the story transitions from Andor 1 to Rogue One, and then into the more starkly black and white classic hero, mythological hero storytelling of A New Hope. How much does that contrast? How much is that like a push and pull? It'd be really something really interesting to see there. And I'd hope for characters like Clea and stuff to start appearing in these books, especially when we see a lot of these bigger characters are gone by the end of Andor season 2. I'd love to see some of these stragglers start making connections in book 2 and maybe have a more prominent role in book 3. So
Mhm.
big fan of the first book, excited for what the next 2 hold. I'm hoping Rebecca can deliver and, make us feel just how we did with the first one.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think it's gonna be a tough act to follow with Alexander Freed because he's just perfect for this style of storytelling. Rebecca Roanhorse has only written one Star Wars book, and that was Resistance Reborn, which wasn't a book I necessarily loved, but I thought was good. But I think changing up the style would kind of be smart for this too. Like, don't try to replicate Alexander Freed because it's going to be very hard to do so. I think trying to make a story that's maybe a little bit more fast paced, a little bit more intense, a little bit more um, has maybe a time element to it, a little bit more chaotic, versus Freed's work is a little bit more methodical and detailed. So I'm interested to see where that goes. A little disappointed we have to wait over a year still for the second book, but I'm hoping it's still pretty great. I am a little bit surprised it's right before Andor season one, like in that five BBY range, because I kind of figured it was going to just span the entirety of the dark times. So we got our like 19 BBY, 18 BBY book. I was kind of expecting a 10-ish BBY book, like right as the Empire's hitting its peak in this time period, and then kind of the fall off around Andor. But when they announced this initiative, I kind of always put it with Andor in my head. I've always kind of felt like this was similarly styled to Andor. So in some ways, an Andor prequel, and especially because it deals with three of the characters who play prominent roles in Andor. And I don't know if they've confirmed yet that these three characters are going to be leading all three books or not. I would imagine they are, or at least some of them are going to play prominent roles. Like you kind of said, I would prefer it to be Saw to be one of the main leads because I just think he's the one who has the least development. Saw or Bale, because Mon Mothma's been given so much stuff. I'm okay with her losing a little bit more perspective, especially as we get into Andor. But still, she's interesting enough to where I would enjoy reading her. But now, after seeing like some of the stuff she does in Andor season two and her whole arc between season one and season two, I don't know if I necessarily need her to have a giant book all about her perspective in this time period because there are other characters who could probably benefit from it a bit more. But yeah, still looking forward to those two books. The first one was really good and can't wait to see what we have in store with those. But now we know we usually get at least three books from uh, Random House Worlds and Lucasfilm Publishing every year in the adult range. We know two of them for next year already. What will be our big summer release? That's still up for debate. And then will we get more than three this year? This year we've gotten a lot. This year we're getting five this year. And I believe the first year that we didn't have, or the year we kind of took a little bit of time off from the High Republic in 2022, was it? We had more books that year as well when the High Republic wasn't dominating. So what will be the plan next year without High Republic kind of built in as a release every few months. Will they go with 3, 4? How many books will we see next year? And will we see an increase in young adult books as well? Because Sonic and I were talking off camera a few weeks ago, just like it's kind of crazy that we have almost gotten no original young adult books in Star Wars since the High Republic has started. And you can even throw the new Acolyte book in as like a High Republic esque book, right? Or at least it's a tie into a movie. And even Crimson Dawn, which was our only one since the High Republic started, is also a tie-in kind of directly to Solo. So there haven't been really too many unique young adult books until this year when we get Last Order. And so are they going to go more in with that style? Are they going to pull back with the High Republic now done? It'll be interesting to see where they go. We'll wrap up the last bit of information here around comics and stuff from Comic-Con this year, and then we'll take your guys' questions. So again, if you're watching right now and you have a question, you have a comment, anything you'd like to discuss, or you have anything to say about the current topics we've been talking about, the Ahsoka and Maul stories, the Comic-Con stories, send it into the chat and we will get to it as soon as we can. It is first come, first serve, unless you send in a Patreon or YouTube membership, a priority question, or you send in a super chat, which will be answered first before any other questions in the chat. All right, let's get into the comic side, which is obviously the namesake of Comic-Con. And we did get some information from the comic side of Star Wars as well. We do have the final High Republic comic coming out tomorrow, High Republic the Finale, written by Kevin Scott. So once that is out, we will be getting a lot more of our High Republic wrap-up coverage now coming out. We're planning on doing 2 tier lists, one for comics, one for books. We'll get you our timelines, our recommended reading orders, all of that type of stuff is going to start coming out over the next few weeks. So if you're interested in High Republic or trying to catch up or anything like that, keep an eye out on the channel for all of that. But we do have that coming out, as well as the next Young Jedi Adventures book is coming out. The training sessions, it's going to be in that younger style, produced by Dark Horse. It is coming out December 9th, 2025. We also have a new horror story from Star Wars, Tales from the Nightlands, coming out from Dark Horse. It is a new comic, and it's coming out September 5th, 2025, written by Kevin Scott, who has been leading these kind of Star Wars horror stories from IDW and now Dark Horse over the last few years. So looking forward to that one as a fan of horror. We are also getting the next Hyperspace Stories graphic novel, which will be Hyperspace Stories General Grievous, which is coming out in early 2026. That one will be exciting to read as well. The first issue of Tides of Terror is also coming out July 30th, 2025. So tomorrow, you can check that book out as well. We got a new announced Bad Batch comic book series coming from Hyperspace Stories as well. It's going to be starting in April of next year, and it is the Bad Batch Clone Force 99, or actually it's starting December of this year, excuse me. The Bad Batch Rogue Agents by Michael Moretti, and it will be coming out this year with issue number 1. We've had the Bad Batch running their own series so far in Hyperspace Stories as well, so they're continuing with their kind of run here in the comics post the end of that show. And the novel itself does come out next week or the week after. We still haven't gotten our review copy for that, which is a little surprising. Might have to check in on that. But it is coming out, and I've heard pretty decent things about it so far. So we'll have that review out for you guys as soon as we get that one read. We have new stuff coming from the series that are ongoing currently. We have the Dr. Aphra series, Legacy of Vader, Jedi Knights. And then we got our first look at Comic-Con at the new Boba Fett Black, White, and Red series, which is coming out. We talked about that a few weeks ago as well. I personally am waiting for that next Treasury edition because those are the best ways to read that story. But those are the wrap-ups from Comic-Con on the comic book side. Not too much in terms of new announcements, which is a little bit disappointing, obviously, for Comic-Con. But there's a lot going on with Star Wars. We've kind of entered this new wave of comics in the last 3 to 5 months as the previous series all ended, and now we've started our next ongoings, which we basically have 3 reoccurring ongoings going on right now. So we are probably not going to get too many new ongoings announced for the next year or so. It's not surprising we didn't hear too much more. But Sonic, what are your thoughts on the minor comic announcements that we got and the future of Star Wars comics going into the beginning of next year.
Well, I'm excited for reading the finale of High Republic on Marvel. I just finished rereading Tempest Breaker and reread through the first line, and Fear of the Jedi as the sequel, Tempest Breaker flows a lot better than I remembered. I just think it still was a choice to kind of fit in Tempest Breaker in between and then rely on another comic to finish it off, and then finding out that's not even the end of it, right? Like, some of the biggest questions, like, is Keeve Trennis really one of the Lost 20 that's always, like, hinted about in the prequels? We haven't had an answer for that, and hopefully this book gives us something about it. So I'm not even sure if we're even gonna get there. Um, yeah, I mean, to your point about the comics, like, yeah, the ongoings have just started, like, in the last few months. It doesn't really seem like that was gonna happen, to have, like, a huge new series or anything. Gavin Scott's just gonna just continue pumping out all those IDW books. He's just a workaholic, and I don't know why. He just really loves the horror stuff. Like, I'd love to see him, especially with how good of a writer he is. I'd love to see him like almost do a whole different like Marvel line or something like that. Like just explore some side characters or some new time period or whatever, and not necessarily have to have any big storyline that it has to connect to or whatever. But it seems like he's just super comfortable with IDW, maybe he just has that relationship with them. Can't blame the guy, right? It's good continuous work, and people definitely are buying it because he's still making plenty of these series. He's all the Vader's Castle and everything. But yeah, pretty interesting there. I do like I mentioned before, I want this Boba, Red, Black, and White to be, like, more of the Maul one and a lot less than the Vader one just because again, it was just so weird to have Vader have to have, like, 2 or 3 stories per issue kind of stuck together. He's already a character that is sharp angles, really, like, you're yeah, simplifying it any further, especially when you don't have a lot of color, when there isn't supreme amounts of dialogue in these books, never made a lot of sense to me, and it just made a lot of those stories bland, versus what we got with Maul, which felt like, wow, this is stuff that really does kinda, like, lean into, like, where he's going in the Clone Wars, or it does talk a little bit more about his characterization by the end of his life and where he's headed to in episode 1. There was, like, some really interesting things and completely new things with his relationship with Palpatine and all that, and I hope we get that with Boba, especially because you can do things where you can still, like, reference his training with Cad Bane and that unfinished animatic. You can reference, like, his whole crew on Tatooine and what went wrong there, like, why did Singer and everybody betray him, and kinda do your own Star Wars 1313. Like, there's a lot of stories you can tell, and he's a character who has even less emotion, arguably, than Vader does on his armor, on his mask, so you can do some really cool things and kinda blend these different eras 'cause he's been a character ever since he became retconned into being a clone to just have like, "Oh, okay, there's a Camino origin. Okay, now there's his sort of prequel to the original trilogy version, and then, okay, there's this original trilogy version." It's a lot, like, there's some very strange, jumps and bizarreness, and then on top of that, yeah, Book of Boba Fett where it try to, like, touch on all of those and never really committed to anything other than kind of making him a hero instead of, like, an anti-hero of sorts. This is just a great way to go with a bit more of that classic characterization while still being able to touch on these different time periods to, like, make us be like, "Oh, okay, this is Boba then, now. What's similar? What's changed?" You can see a little bit more progression, you can connect the dots. He's a character that just has always been kinda thrown into these big time periods in both canon and legends that you're like, "Okay, is he still the classic Boba? What's different about him?" Like, and canon has just unfortunately been a little bit more rougher because it doesn't have like, the Jasper Mural backstory with Jango and stuff to, like, really connect all the way through to what we see him, like, 20 years after Return of the Jedi and Legends. So, I'd love this to be a start to at least get some of those ideas kinda laid out there. So, excited for that. Yeah, I mean, I hope these ongoings go well. I know people are really enjoying Legacy of Vader with Kylo Ren and everything. I'm enjoying what I've read so far of the main Star Wars line. It sucks that there isn't anything really new, but who knows? Maybe they're gonna do something more like the 2015 runs where they'd have, like because they only have these 3 ongoings, they have, like, okay, 2 of them crossover and then 2 issues there, bam. Like, that was a nice balance. We don't necessarily need the 2020 era of, like, all the 4 or 5 different main lines jammed together in events that make sense for some, but not all. So, maybe they're just kinda holding off on that. Doesn't seem like it's ready per se. Maybe it's stuff that we see
Mhm.
6 months from now because it's only gonna be these 2 main lines connected to each other, and it makes sense because Luke is in this, and Aphra is in this, and bam, okay, sure, makes sense. So, it's a little bit disappointing overall. It seems like we are kind of wrapping up a lot of stuff in comics and then just going with the flow with whatever's already been just started. But yeah, I can't complain. It seems like Star Wars is really trying to get movies right back on top next year, and then everything else, if that's a
Yeah.
big success
Yeah.
for them, will start flowing the money downward.
No, definitely. That's their priority. We'll see. Next year is a new beginning for pretty much every phase of Star Wars, except for comics. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the one stable-ish thing that's starting next year with new future for streaming, new future for film, new future for books without High Republic. We're going to start to see all these things coalesce next year, and we'll see the direction they have in store for us for the next few years. We're going to turn it over to your questions right now for most of the remainder of the stream. We still have a few other stories we can bring up if the questions stagnate. But again, if you have a question, a comment, a theory, anything you'd like to discuss about Star Wars, about anything else in the worlds of pop culture, film, TV, whatever, send it into the chat and we will get to it. It is first come, first serve. But if you do send in a super chat, you get bumped up to the top immediately. We will answer your question. If you want to check out Patreon, YouTube memberships as well, there are perks that give you priority chat access as well as some other live stream perks as well. All right, starting out the chat tonight was Jerome Valar, who says if Fantastic Four was set in the 1960s and the MCU is set in present day, would the Fantastic Four age to meet present day Universe 616? Um, that's interesting. I don't think so. I think they're just going to go straight from the Earth they're in currently at the age they currently are in to the Earth we see in the 616 universe that we see in the main Marvel universe. Obviously, without giving too much away from Fantastic Four, because it's only been out for 5 days or so, um, I think more of the answers to these questions are, to me, a little bit more surprisingly going to be coming from the Avengers movies. I thought we'd get a little bit more in the Fantastic Four movie itself. That's not a negative or positive about Fantastic Four. It's just the way they decided to tell the story. And so I thought they did a good job with the story they decided to tell. But I did think that this film in particular would do a little bit more of the heavy lifting to set up Doomsday and to set up Secret Wars. And it really doesn't at all. So um, I'm very unsure what how those movies will start. Like, what is Doomsday going to be? I think it's more intriguing now than ever after Fantastic Four. But yeah, Sonic, what do you think? Do you think we will see an aged version of Fantastic Four in obviously Doomsday or Secret Wars or whatever? Um, Wherever we eventually get our first crossover with the main 616 universe, because and even with the Doomsday announcement, there's not too many 616 characters who are announced for Doomsday. It is a lot of the Fox universe, whatever that ends up getting designated, and a lot, obviously, all the Fantastic Four characters. And then we have a handful like Ant-Man and Shang-Chi and Thor that are sprinkled in there as well. But it's going to be dominated by most of the other Marvel characters from the other universes. So do you think we see aged Fantastic Four, or do you think they're going to be about the same age that we saw them in this film?
I mean, we already kinda see them age in the films themselves because they do jump around a lot time-wise. It's a very fast-paced film, but things are moving. It's not like some of these other movies where it's like, "Oh, this happens over a week or at max a couple months." It's like there's years in this film covers. So, I don't know how much more we're gonna age naturally. It seems like just from, like, all the leaks and everything, they're trying to, like, almost line everything up to happen in 2027. But it seems like Spider-Man's gonna be set during then. It seems like Brave New World, Brave New Days clearly trying to be like a touch point, with Doomsday. Daredevil seem and Thunderbolts are trying to Thunderbolts are still pretty far ahead continuity-wise for everything too, so there's a lot of, like, dates that they're trying to, like, line up, right? And this is not like the Mandoverse, right? It's they don't r they really do actually care about their dates, you know? It's just now that the blip, we've kinda surpassed the 5-year gap of the blip, in real time, and I was like, "Okay, are we gonna jump super far ahead?" Maybe a year or 2 max with Doomsday and Secret Wars, but yeah, I mean, it's the 828 universe for Fantastic Four. It's supposed to be like, Reed Richards, they exist here, the whole family exists here, they don't seemingly exist in 616 at all, right?
Mhm.
And was that a choice that I absolutely loved when I first heard about it? Not really. I was hoping there's, like, some sort of reason why they were, like, disappeared from history, but I think the simpler choice of just making an alternate universe actually kinda benefited the film and let it be more standalone, let you focus on the family and everything instead of being like, "How are we gonna force a connection here?" So it could have some aging, I don't really know, I don't think that's how it'll make sense. Um, I don't know. There is some j time jumps in that film. Is there gonna be a couple more, a year or 2 in our 616 universe to catch up to them maybe, and with their time jumps equivalent-wise? I don't know. I don't know if that even makes sense to do that, if that even makes sense logically, but it could. I don't see any reason to unless you're really trying to age up Franklin more. I don't think there's any real reason to do that yet. Focus more on just the main 4 because, we've only got 1 film out of them, and I'd love to see more of the Thing. I'd love to see more of Johnny and more of Reed's side with Doom and everything, so why not, like, just keep them as they are by the end of the film? And, they don't necessarily have to be the ones going to, 616. I know the Thunderbolts post-credit scene shows what seemingly is Excelsior coming about, right? And we do know both of the mid-credit scenes in those films in Fantastic Four and in Thunderbolts where it's directed by the Russos. Is this gonna be more of like a situation where Thunderbolts is like the meaty one, and then the less meaty one that is in Fantastic Four is gonna be fleshed out in the film, kinda like how Ant-Man 2015 had, like, a scene that's literally from Civil War, but then played out, extended, made bigger? Like, I don't know, like, there could be stuff like that. Uh, there's been a lot of interviews with Feige and everything, and he's saying, like, a lot of people are gonna visit the Baxter Building. Does that necessarily mean it's just, like, they're gonna land in New York Times Square and everybody's gonna go there? Or are we gonna if they can come into 616, who's to say that 616 can't send some delegates over and, enjoy or, like, spend some time in 828, right? When it's calmer and a lot more peaceful than 616 is by relative standards, right? So, I am very curious about that more so than the aging part, like, how much is it gonna be more back and forth between the universe with incursions, with magic, or whatever they're using to explain why this space, like, all these space situations are happening at the end of Thunderbolts. Um, would it make sense to, like, have their universe be folded? Yeah, probably in Secret Wars, but then maybe you could age up some characters, but I don't think it would be massive aging up. I don't think it'd be necessary for Doomsday, it's more just a post Secret War sorta situation.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's pretty accurate they're going to do. Like, I don't I see this next film, Doomsday, just being kind of something that takes place over the over multiple universes, but, like, obviously the Fantastic Four is supposed to be the focus of it, and so I feel like almost in some ways we're gonna start seeing everything pulled into their world a little bit more concretely, and I would imagine that that film will start mostly with Doctor Doom and, like, the way Thanos was kind of the main character of Infinity War. Doctor Doom will be the main character of that movie, and I feel like, honestly, the way they've left it, it might be the first 45 minutes are just Doctor Doom and, like, nothing else really, and then you have your conflict really kick off, and so, that's where I feel like they're gonna kinda go, and whatever time jump they need for that, they will, but it's not gonna be like, we're not gonna jump 25, 30 years or more in time. It might be 2 more years or 5 more years. I wouldn't be shocked if they wanna jump a little bit, um, just to make obviously, at the end of the film, we jump I don't wanna spoil too much, I guess, but, like, there's time jumps throughout the movie. The post-credit scene takes place further in the future than the rest of the movie, and so, uh we already have jumped a bunch in time. I wouldn't be shocked if they jump a few more years to make Franklin a little bit more competent, for the movie to make him an actual character. So we'll see what they do with that because I think that would be interesting. But yeah, I imagine Doom's going to be the main character by far of Doomsday and not just in a villain role. Like, I think we are going to see him lead the movie, and almost everybody else might be antagonists to him and his story because they really have not set up anything. And so it's a blank slate. But yeah, thanks for the question, Jerome. Critical Thinker says, what Legends writers would you want to see return, and what would you want to see them write? Well, that's a great question. Well, right off the bat, one for me that means a lot to me because he's written my favorite Star Wars book, and even though he's written two canon books, I don't necessarily count him as a canon writer, and uh, that's James Luceno. I would love to see him return, and I'd love to see him write anything, but specifically maybe something dark side related, or something prequel era. He does a great job with both of those, so I'd love to see him return to do that. But it is a little bit of a cheat because he has already written some canon stuff. I would say Stover is obviously the number one that most people would probably have. He is still alive and he could write Star Wars. He has written less Star Wars than people think, and he's definitely picked and choosed a lot of his stories. Like he did one New Jedi Order book, he did Revenge of the Sith novelization, in one Clone Wars book, and he did like a passion project for him connecting to like some of his favorite stuff with Luke Skywalker and Shadows of Endor. So I would love it to just be Stover comes in now with the deluxe edition of Revenge of the Sith with this new celebration around this novel. Maybe we eventually, I kind of was hoping before like Comic-Con celebration, one of those times would be the place to get an announcement that he was coming back to Star Wars. But I'd love it if he just had an idea for Star Wars and he came in and he pitched it and he was like, hey, I want to do this. And they're like, yeah, do whatever you want because you're Matthew Stover and you're one of the best writers we've ever had. So I'd love to see him back, and I would love it to be anything he would like to do because he's written kind of everything. He's written all the different styles. Obviously, he handled he handles character studies pretty well, and most of his books have been character studies. But Shadows of Mendor is the like odd one that's kind of just like a fun B story. So he can do that as well. So whatever his heart desires, I would go with him. I'd love to see. I believe Stackpole's still alive, right? Like I would love to see
Yeah.
Stackpole come back for some type of New Republic style story. If he could, do a semi reboot of X Wing. Um, I know Aaron Alston passed away, so can't do him. um, but yeah, I would love to see Stackpole come back and maybe run a story there. And I know he's been vocal in the past about Star Wars and things he wants to see with Star Wars. And Stackpole hasn't really necessarily been around since the late 90s, early 2000s in Star Wars. So it wouldn't be, somebody who's been around and just, phased out during Legends. So it'd probably be a big one to pull back, but I still would love to see it. I'd be interested in what he's doing. I'm trying to think of who else off the top of my head. I mean, those are the big ones. There are ones like Karen Travis who are never coming back. Um, but I would like to see her back to do something too. I think she could do a good job. But yeah, I'll pass it over to you, Seneca, while I try to think of some more. But yeah, off the top of my head, I would say easily the three, and they're three of the best Star Wars writers ever would be Lucino, Stover, and Stackpole.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could have gotten more of Alston. He was someone who handled later Legends so well, despite everybody kinda going crazy around him. Um, you know, um, Especially once popular culture started shifting more and more to unified, multimedia franchising. He understood, like, balance, moderation was always key, while still having his focuses beyond, like, interpersonal relationships and dynamics just happens to be around, starship fighting. So, miss having him around. Michael Reeves also passed away. He would have been pretty fun, especially since he has some of the more interesting books with the Coruscant Night books, the trilogy there, but he died 2 years ago, I believe, of Parkinson's or something, so shame there. Um, another person who's passed away, AC Crispin. I think she'd be wonderful to really like build off of where we left off in the Solo movie, especially because she did the original Young Han Solo story with her Young Han Solo trilogy. I wouldn't hate Denning having a book or two. I just don't want him to lead or be like the foundational piece of like an ongoing, storyline. I don't like that. Just keep it to one book. I'm not saying he has to, like, earn trust. Obviously, he earned enough trust amongst the publishing team to kinda do what he wanted to and continue to come back and back and back, but it started just becoming too much, right? So I don't know. I wasn't a fan of what he ended up with in later Legends, but I wouldn't hate him coming back. I mean, we've already John Jackson Miller who, he did Kenobi, but he's had some other books that I weren't like, "Ah, okay." But then I loved The Living Force. It's exactly the vibes of, like, 1998, the year before Star Wars came out, when the '98 comic had started coming out, people were like, "I wanna know about all these characters on the Jedi Council." He hit that on the nail and did some really interesting stuff out of it, so I love that. I don't know, I'm trying to think who else. Stackpole for sure. Carpiscian, if he
Yeah.
writes more like Bane and less like Revan, just because I think he'd be better with an original character or a character that he can kinda overwrite the details of. He didn't really care too much for the Jedi Exile and anything in KOTOR 2, which is a shame because there's a richer storytelling in 2 than 1. Even if 1 is a classically bigger adventure, 2 is the first, like, subversion in Star Wars that actually happened, and you can be like, "Oh, wow, like, this stuff is crazy," and people enjoyed it because the writing was just that good, it was undeniable, and then he kinda ignored it for all the Revan book, and, it just Revan just started getting weird from there anyways, but I'd love to see him do something with a new original Sith. Like, we've had, like, some very interesting ones from Charles Soule, like Darth Moment and all that kind of appear, and you're like, "Okay, I wanna see Carpiscian do that." I don't think he'd be willing to do Bane again. I don't think he should, especially with, like, the changes that are gonna be there with Bane's physical appearance and all that, but he can do some really interesting things with, like, Tenebris and before, or, like, this breakaway lineage that's going on with Chimere, if he's just a pretender, if he's the f the predecessor to the Knights of Ren, like, there could be some really cool dark side-esque storytelling that I think he can handle, and I'd love to see that. I don't know if he's super interested though, honestly, but I'd like to see that. I don't know who else, honestly, there's not
I've
many.
got one that I thought of, completely opposite side of Legends, but Jude Watson, they
Oh,
really
yeah,
do
yeah,
need help in that, like, junior novel range. Like,
yeah,
honestly, we've talked about it with you critical thinker before, like, recommending, A Test of Courage and stuff like that, and that's a really good junior novel book, but junior novels in general under Star Wars have been nowhere close to the quality, the impact, and the length of storytelling that they were in Legends. Like these epic series that Jude Watson ran. She ran 3 of them and also contributed to a variety of other junior novel style storytelling. Like if they want to get kids books going again, and I think that's a place to target because like we've talked about in the past, is there as much love from kids around Star Wars as there was when we were growing up, or as when the sequels were first coming out, as when people grew up in the 90s or 80s. Is there that love? Because there's so many other things to be a fan of right now. Is Star Wars amongst them? And I would say outside of, familial influences like parents showing their kids Star Wars, there hasn't been too much in terms of content to be there to grab the imagination of children, right? And so one of the things for us growing up was that we had great entry level kids Star Wars books on top of entry level kids Star Wars comics and the films obviously and TV. Like there was all forms of Star Wars multimedia growing up. I feel like they're still good Star Wars junior novel books, but they're not quite at the level of excitement as those old books, like, to basically get the entire origin story of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, and it was in the kids' books, like, that was something that under Disney, you would never see because it would be considered too important of a story to put to a children's book, but maybe sometimes you need to get more important stories. So I'd throw Jude Watson in there. I think she's somebody. I think she's still alive. I tried looking up her name to make sure, but it didn't pop up with any. She doesn't have a birth date on Wikipedia or Wikipedia or anywhere else on the internet. So I think she's still alive, but I'd love to see her return to Star Wars. She's one of the most underrated architects of the EU.
Yeah, I mean, I guess someone else is underrated, Greg Keyes from New Jedi
Yeah,
Order, you
I
know,
was gonna say
he
Greg Keyes too,
he's
but
a good one. I'm really surprised he only had just those 3 New Jedi Order books and I guess Emissary of the Void, but that's, like, only NJO, and I don't know if he just didn't feel the need to return to it because he's done other things like Godzilla versus Kong tie-in books and all that. He's still an active writer. I love to see him come back because he really did focus on developing the next generation and really the Vong Society in the books that he wrote. I think those are some pretty interesting details that he implemented that all the
mhm.
other authors can kinda just hand wave over because he's already laid the foundation. Yeah, I don't know, he has some of the more higher rated ones, and he just never came back.
Well, and I think it's also kind of like what do you want to describe as a legends author, critical thinker as well? Because like somebody, I was gonna say Greg Keyes, but he's only had 3 books. The same like R.A. Salvatore only wrote
Yeah.
2 books. Like, but they all wrote great ones or really good ones. So would we want to see them back? Absolutely. But yeah, I think Carpathian's another good one to throw in there. I think those are the types of like architects of the Legends universe that I would love to see come back. But yeah, thanks for that question. Jerome says, I want to see more of Darth Revan, a fan favorite for sure, but canon wise, I felt like there's not enough material about him. Well, in canon, there's basically no material about him. But if you're talking about Legends as well, there is a surprising lack of material for how much everybody talks about him. There's basically just the game, some appearances in the comics, and his book. And then obviously the MMORPG, which is more of a controversial story for him. So yeah, I would love to see more Revan content too. Maybe one day we'll get that canon reintroduction again with a character like that. I just feel like one of the most frustrating things about canon and with Disney's reign on Star Wars is like it seems like they're very aware of what things could be massive cash cows, and because of that, they haven't let anybody play with those toys just in case they want to do it in a bigger medium because they don't want to mess with the canon. But now that we are messing with canon more than we said we would when we launched this in 2012, and solidified canon in 2014, maybe they would consider giving us some Revan content in games or in books or in comics. And then if they do decide to do their film or TV show, we just do the old legend style of like, well, the TV show is the official canon and everything else just is going to have to be retrofit and retconned to fit around that. But yeah, more Revan content, the better.
Yeah, it is weird, like, you would think, like, with how much of his backstory is hinted at in KOTOR and everything, that we'd actually see a lot of it, and you don't, right? He's almost like, I guess a good, like, counter not counter, but, like, a good example of somebody that isn't talked about as much, but kinda has the same sort of backstory about becoming a militant Jedi and, is like Eula Queldroma. He literally does fight one of the Mandalores, and we have this guy here who is fighting in the Mandalorian Wars and takes the mask from, like, a dead Mandalorian, right? And it becomes, like, an iconic rallying point for everybody, and you see that in a comic panel, but you get frankly, you almost get more characterization for Malik, like, even in those comics, you don't show Revan's face because I mean, the whole point is, like, you can play as Revan, but not even having a canonical face to him in those comics was a choice until Star Wars: The Old Republic, and then Star Wars: The Old Republic is just it continues off of a lot of the I would say misfires of the ending of the Revan book, and, the whole revanchist idea is cool, don't get me wrong, but, like, the idea of his soul splitting up and there's, like, a good Revan and there's a bad Revan, and it goes on way longer than that. It was just after I saw that, I was like, "I have 0 interest in this," like, and I at that point, as a Star Wars fan, especially someone who was trying to get into the Old Republic without necessarily being able to pay for the Old Republic at that point or having a good enough PC, I was holding on to every single detail about, like, how you're gonna continue the KOTOR stories, and then that was the story, and I was like, "Really? That's the story?" Like, it just got weirder there. I don't know. It never really made sense for him to be alive 300 years later, and then the exile is just kinda like a wispy force ghost that kinda comes and goes. I don't know. It was a choice. It seemed like they really got the idea of like, "Hey, we need way more Revan storytelling," but that's not the time period that really matters for him. I wanna know more about him and Bastila. I wanna know more about their child. I wanna know what happened in the years between KOTOR 1 and KOTOR 2 instead of just starting the Revan novel as, like, an explanation for why he disappears, right? Like, it's like, okay, that's cool, but why wouldn't he, like, at least have a little bit of story there? Like, it just that's the one thing, like, I don't truly love about the shift between KOTOR 1 and 2. It's like 2, you start with the triumvirate right away. You're just like, "Oh, what do you mean? Like, we ended with a huge victory, like, everything's good again by the end of KOTOR 1," and then you're like, "What? The whole galaxy's destroyed, the Jedi are in hiding again." You're like, "What?" And it's only been, like, 3 years? That's the crazy thing. Like, if there was, like, a 10-year gap, I can understand that more. But the 3-year gap and the way Revan writes the story and how long it takes to even, explain why this has happened because it almost feels very fetch questy in the book. You're like, "Oh, okay, interesting." It's more just touching base with, like, his old friends like Canderous and all that, and you're like, "Okay, interesting." Yeah, that was what I always felt a bit of a shame, like, Karpyshyn, as good of as a writer he was for the Bane trilogy, he just didn't really seem to have much interest about or wasn't allowed to really explore Revan, and kinda had to flesh out all the Old Republic connections and then throw in Revan in scenes that any character almost could have fit in. And I get it, like, Revan is how you want him to be, but that was a chance to really stamp him down.
Critical Thinker says if you could only pick one, which canceled Clone Wars arc would you most like to see animated again? I think for me it comes down to two. It's Crystal Crisis and then Boba Fett arc with Cad Bane. And I think I'd lean towards that one. I just really want to see that arc solidified because I love Cat Bane and I love Boba Fett, and the stuff we have seen has been pretty cool. And overall, I think the story would be pretty neat. So I'd go with that one.
I have the same too, but I would go with Crystal Crisis. I just think it's so important to finally see Anakin and Obi-Wan without Ahsoka, and, they have the Episode 3 look basically with their costumes kinda revamped there for the first time. It obviously would work a lot better if you had that arc and then you had more of a longer arc without the Martez sisters, like the original version of Ahsoka's, like, travels and, like, how she's under the Jedi Temple and discovers a Sith shrine that, Yoda kinda hallucinates during his season 6 arc and all that, like, some really cool things there that, should show, like, how they've, still have their connections together, even if they're not directly with each other anymore, how they're both affecting each other. I I was kinda shocked to not see the Anakin Obi-Wan, like, fireside chat about, like, how would you feel if, if I failed you, if I, like, I turned, right? And he's like, "I'm glad to know that that'll never happen," right? So and it's just like, "Okay, great." And that didn't happen. I don't know if that's something that could happen in Ahsoka season 2. It just doesn't seem like it would work that well. It doesn't seem like there's gonna be any Obi-Wan season 2 after all the big rumors. Maybe if we get a special or something, they can do it in live action, but I wanna see it animated. I also just wanna see, Anakin kind of, like, mess around with a bunch of guns, 'cause, with his reflexes, with how martial focused he is, he's kinda going crazy with them in the sequence, and there's just some really cool animation, and just fighting on Utapau in general with all the different aliens and spider droids and everything. It's, like, really pushing both of them to a different level of power than even the show had shown, so I wanna see all that, and obviously just the actual crystal and everything going on there, the connections to the original trilogy. Um, yeah, I have all the same feelings with the Cad Bane Boba one. I don't know if they necessarily need more than, like, 2 episodes. I don't know if there's, like, a 3-episode arc there. It could've even been 1 if you're trying to play it, like, truly like a Western and kinda just have little gaps and jumps, but we did see it referenced in the concept art for Cad Bane. We do see, like, the skull cap. It's canon, it's just not shown yet, versus where Crystal Crisis is also canon, but there's nothing that's referencing, and I get it. It's not super important, but it's important to the characters for me, and I wanna see that and how they transform from their last appearance in season 5, basically, and then where they are once Ahsoka reunites with them in season 7, so yeah, besides that, I guess I kinda wanna see the Top Gun arc with R2-D2 and Rex, where, like, the regular clones and the clone pilots kinda have, like, their whole standoff there, like the Navy versus Army kind of vibes, or Navy versus Marines, or however you wanna put it, just to see, like, a little bit more of, like, that interaction that's hinted at with Rex and how R2 kinda get along at the start of the beginning of the season, Mandalore, but all these other clones are, like, groaning, like, "Ah, how much longer do we have to be hiding up on these, like, scaffolding and everything?" And while these 2 are just so buddy-buddy more than they've ever truly been. So, I would love to just see that because I kinda miss that George Lucas-esque just funny arcs that are happening, like, I think it would be a much more sincere not sincere per se, but a much more thrilling version of, like, what we got with D Squad. If you didn't love the D Squad crew, you probably hated the arc unless you were just there for Gregor, and he takes a while to show up. Here with Rex, you already got some super pre-established, with R2 even more established, and then just seeing something that isn't so, like, plot heavy, but more about dynamics, I would have loved to see that too.
Yeah, that would have been cool. Dark Disciple was another one that was up there for me, but I just love the book, so like I don't need to see that animated.
Yeah.
It's just it would be very cool to see it one day, but it won't be something that I ever need to happen, because the book to me is just that good. But yeah, thanks for that question. Next question from Critical Thinker is, now that the High Republic is over, without spoilers, as I haven't read the High Republic yet, how does it compare to the EU books, like, or book initiatives like New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi, etc.? What are its strengths and weaknesses? Is it worth the read? Well, we did a video already on this topic, and you can find it in our feed, and it was pretty recent. It was the last 3 or 4 videos, where we broke this down quite a bit already, and we did cover this in our High Republic live stream as well. If you want to see like the longer unedited version of that, to kind of summarize what I said, this to me is more of a comparison. I think you get rid of Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi right away, just because those two are book only initiatives, and they were, tightly structured 9 book only initiatives. They were released a certain way, and this doesn't really compare to that at all because this is a true multimedia initiative. So in that way, it's still even hard to compare to New Jedi Order, because New Jedi Order had no multimedia until years later it got some comics. So I think the only thing that's really comparable to New Jedi Order is the fact that both of these are very, very long. They came out over a significant amount of time in real life and in story, and they both are relatively significant for the Star Wars lore. Um, and both dealt with a large set of characters versus a smaller set of characters, right? So that's right off the bat. I think the 2 ways you can compare them, but I think you throw in like a combination of New Jedi Order and Clone Wars multimedia is kind of the way to really look at High Republic. Now, obviously the flaw with looking at Clone Wars multimedia is that the show was the big centerpiece, and we don't have anything in the High Republic that's the centerpiece like that. The Acolyte was tagged as High Republic, but it really isn't High Republic like at all. It takes place so far away from High Republic's main story that I don't personally really count it until they start to connect the pieces a little bit more. But that being said, in terms of quality, I would say this is to me a step below New Jedi Order. I think New Jedi Order's cohesiveness, and yes, it does have its lulls. Yes, sometimes it does take a while to get going in some of those first few duologies. But I think New Jedi Order, when it hits its peaks are higher than anything that to me the High Republic does. But again, it's very difficult to compare because the High Republic is a prequel story versus New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi. All of those were sequel stories, so you could go wherever you wanted with the characters. You could do whatever you wanted. This is a story that ultimately the outcome has to wrap up in a way that's satisfying with the lore that you already have for the original trilogy. So it can't go too crazy because one of the things we talked about with this blight conflict that's in the story, and I'm trying not to spoil anything for you, Critical Thinker, but the Blight is like the main villain of the Phase 3 stories. Is that like, how can it really be as impactful as they're trying to make it seem in the stories? because you never hear anything about it at all in any of the movies or especially in the prequels, right? When that's the closest stories, or even in The Acolyte, which takes place about 100 years after this. So, how do you really make it a significant plot point? And I think they do a good job of wrapping it up. But it's a tough act to, a tough tightrope to walk with the significance of the story. So I'd say right off the bat, if you're looking at significance, it doesn't have the significance of storytelling that New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi had, or even Clone Wars Multimedia Initiative at the time had, because there wasn't a Revenge of the Sith yet. So there was a lot of ground being paved. Um, as for characters, I think it does a great job with its main set of characters and creating new interesting Jedi, a different look at Jedi, and some interesting different conflicts and different concepts for Jedi in this time. And I think overall, the idea that it was going for, of like trying to show the Jedi at their peak while also showing them slowly descend into the more dogmatic versions that you start to see, eventually in the Acolyte and then in the prequels. I think it does a great job of doing that for the characters. So, character wise, I think it hits a home run. Where we personally, I think, both agree that it starts to fall flat is a little bit in its multimedia. It's like the comics aren't that important to the overall story when you connect it to the books. So, like, that has its own issues. And then the way they've plotted things out, they often went for a style that you don't really see in Star Wars multimedia, and that's not one cohesive story. It's more each author tells their own stories and it builds into one big story. And while that that concept didn't necessarily impact the adult novels, which is the core of the story, it certainly impacted young adult, junior novels, and comics in some ways, because this year's example as well, you have High Republic Phase 3 comics. They end on a cliffhanger, and then all the answers are found out in an audiobook, and then the follow-up for that is another comic series. So it's just kind of like, if you're invested fully into this thing, you can get a lot out of it. If you're somebody who's going to pick and choose what to read because you're not fully in, I think they did a poor job of getting you completely invested in the non-adult book storytelling, because they skip around with so many different sets of characters and so many different plot points that there's not like one specific thing to get attached to. If you're a young adult fan, it's hard to fully get attached to the young adult sets of characters because it jumps around book to book to different characters. Same with kids' books. Same with the comics are still one set of characters, but the plot points are less important. So that would be overall. I think there was problems with the way they structured it. But the plot points that they really went after, especially in the books, I thought absolutely delivered. And so I would say its book storytelling is of a more consistent, higher quality than probably Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi. It's not as quite as high as New Jedi Order, but it's definitely less impactful, and obviously doesn't deal with the Skywalkers. So in some ways, a little less memorable than Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi because of that. But I think if you go book to book, the overall quality of the adult novels is is higher on average than the mid quality of some of the things in Fate of the Jedi and Legacy of the Force.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really deny or change any big points there. I think just for extra context, there are 3 phases of the High Republic. In Phase 2, after the cliffhanger, Phase 1 kinda goes back another 100 years, and that's a choice that we didn't love. It actually ended up being the most consistent phase because there's just less material, and the comics are trying not to, like, bring in characters that should stay in the books, right? Like, that's a big point, like, it's the execution of, like, having these characters converge between different mediums. As cool of an idea as it was just very inconsistent, like, I would have loved if you had, like, scenes repeat in the young adult novels, and then in that same scene, you have the young adult leads, right, and what they're doing or what they're tasked
Mhm.
with, right? Like, having them be connected with, like, the secondary duties of what's going on and then running into their own issues. So that way it's like, okay, original stuff, but you're also dealing with stuff that adult novel characters are like, "You have to deal with this, and, this is what we're facing. If you can add any information or help here, that'd be awesome." Right? If that happened, It'd be great. It's really for both of us, the young adult novels just felt so disconnected when they should have been a nice little balance between what's going on in the comics and the adult novels, and it was more to the comics, but not super a lot. If anything, it was like the middle grade, the junior reader novels that actually had a lot of connections because of High Republic Adventures from IDW and Dark Horse, and there's a lot of crossover there, and because it's not such a high reading level for those stories, you could be a bit more surprised by it. There's a lot more consistent casts, especially in Phase 3 books. It's just the young adult novels as a concept seems to have fallen apart other than, like, legacy franchises like Hunger Games and all that. It seems like just in the whole industry, maybe it's just not really a thing anymore despite 10, 15 years ago being, like, the dominant force for
Mhm.
books, even more than adult novels at one point. So that was something, like, when we talked about earlier in the stream, we're like, "Yeah, there's really no young adult novels that have come out at all in the last couple of years for Star Wars besides what we got in the High Republic." It doesn't seem like it's a thing that kids either are expecting to be, like, sticking around with these junior reader novels and then maybe comics and then jump into adult novels or something. I don't know. It's certainly a choice, but and the same issue as I've said about the young adult novels, comics, there's a consistent cast throughout all of them, and I think, like, when they're not trying to jump and grab characters from the books, like we see in the Phase 2 comics for Marvel, it's very solid all around. You don't have to read it, but it really does flesh out the world. It really does enhance, like, listening to Battle of Jedha, which is an incredible audio drama, and then you get little tiny teases about what happens in the comics, and then you get to read the comics separately, and you're like, "Oh, that's okay, that's how big the scale was that this audio drama didn't even try to force all those details in, like some of the adult novels would kinda do." So, that's something I wish was a little bit more rectified in the comics for Phase 1 and Phase 3. There especially, like, in Phase 1, there's a huge character one from one of the adult novels that after their first big real appearance goes into the comics, right? And then all their evolution, all the changes in the character arc is referenced in the other adult novel appearances they get, but they never are, like, that big of a character again, like, until Phase 3, and it's a big shame because I think what you could have done with the comics is you can reference all these things happening, kinda do semi recaps when you bring these characters, have them have a mini comic exclusive arc, and then go back to just being like, "Oh, that's cool if you read it, but connect the dots to where we've seen them in that first big adult novel, go here, next." Right? Like, just keep the comics just like the young adult novels, more secondary focuses, dealing with their own original things. If you're gonna bring these adult novel characters to touch into every medium, have them have stories that are exclusive to that medium that you can reference as one or like, "Oh, that's just where I was," but doesn't, like, change them dramatically. They should never be, like, leading star characters. They should be important supporting characters, but in this one case, without really spoiling who the character is, they become so important in the comics that take away from the main leads of those comics, and then you're expected to understand everything by the end of the Phase 1 comics that then segues you back into their appearances in the adult novels, and then you're trying to play catch up, it doesn't really feel as good, and for the most part, I'll give them credit, they rectified that in Phase 3, they kinda did what I was saying, like, "Okay, here's an audio drama, you got some cool story and role here, but you're not necessarily important, you're not necessarily changed dramatically by it, you can kinda skip it." That's how it should have been. If you read all of it like us, if you're canon junkies about everything, it's fantastic as a read. But if you're like, "Oh, I'm only reading adult novels," that's where or I'm only reading the young adult novels, or if I'm only reading comics, that's where this initiative kinda struggled, because anytime there was crossover characters, it could be good, but frankly, it was just like, "Oh, man, like, I have to read everything to understand it." Even those comics that you're reading, they'll be like, "Oh, this scene happened in this miniseries," and they'll have, like, a note box under, like, a panel, and you're like, "Okay, I don't have the money to buy that," or, like, "Go rent that out or something," right? It's got way too interconnected and too important for ongoing stories, even for characters within those mediums. So, that was the biggest issue with it. But if you do manage to read everything, you get like I was talking about before with Liam, right? Like Phase Three's High Republic comics are really solid, leads into the audio drama, which is quite solid too. And then the miniseries kind of ties you back into what's happening in the final book. And you're like, oh, I get that perspective. It's actually hinted at properly in that adult novel without being like, oh, we have to like explain everything
Mhm.
or like we're missing all these details, right? That's how it worked. It seemed like they made those corrections a little too late. And then with how spread out Phase 3 was in real life time, like how long that phase was compared to how congested Phase 1 was, and then how limited material there was in Phase 2 and kinda spread out that was and then being 100 years before everything. Yeah, they made some strong choices. They were just a bit bizarre and execution was lacking. But yeah, like Liam said, I think better than Legacy of the Force. I think better than Fate of the Jedi, just for their ambition and the scale of what they're going for. But nothing will ever really touch New Jedi Order again in any Star Wars history, I feel like. Just the scale of that is underplayed even in those books. And then Legacy of the
Mhm.
Force and Fate of the Jedi downplay it even further, which is crazy to me. But
Yeah.
that is kind of what we have from the later EU, just trying to continue building out and almost replicating that success with less time, with less authors, with, less innovation. After New Jedi Order, it seemed like they took a step back from everything because the prequels demanded the focus, which that's fine, but, yeah, I don't know. It just never really made sense to me.
Yeah, and I think, again, critical thinker, like you're somebody who's steeped in the EU already. Um, it's going to be hard for you to compare any of these to High Republic. It's just so different than any of these other ones, and like even me, like I'm having a hard time, like because generally I do think the average High Republic adult novel is better than the average Legacy of the Force, novel. But do the peaks of the Legacy of the Force storytelling, like the most impactful and interesting ideas from there, you know, are they more memorable? Do they stick in my mind more than the High Republic peaks? Yeah, because they deal with the Skywalkers and they deal with characters that you've loved forever, right? So it's a tough thing to compare. We don't really have too many things in the EU to compare it directly because pretty much everything in the EU centered around the Skywalkers, unless it jumped before the prequels, right? And we never really did any storytelling in this. We never did any storytelling in this period in the EU. And that's why I think the High Republic is something that was an interesting choice for them because it was something you can't directly compare to the EU. So, as much as people want to say, like, oh, how is it versus New Jedi Order? It really is something that's completely different than all of them. Like, you can't compare it to one specific one. So, just like all of them, it has its flaws and its pros and cons, but I think it's worthwhile reading. I think the adult novels you get something out of. But again, because it's a prequel story, it is a little bit safer than something you would read in one of those other three initiatives because it can't push the story too far. Otherwise, you go, well, why is this not in the prequels or why is this not in the Star Wars movies at all? So, yeah, but thanks for the question. And we will be doing for you, critical thinker, and for anybody else who's interested, we'll be doing that recommended reading order where we'll be talking about the novels, the young adult novels, the kids' books, the comics, all the different things around the High Republic, and telling you which ones you should absolutely read to get the core of the story. Because, like Sonic was saying, you have so many plot points that are answered in different material uh, that to get the biggest points of the story, sometimes you do need to read an issue of a comic here, or a comic duology there, or a short story there. So we'll be doing that full video, and it's going to be different than the past few videos we've done because we've done a timeline and a recommended reading order all in the same thing. I think this time, because the recommended reading order is going to be so long and so like scattered across so many different phases and waves, we're gonna have to do that as a separate video. So keep an eye out for that as well. So Batasai sends in some questions. Good to see you, Batasai. It's been a while. These will probably wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. So make sure you get in your last question if you want, or a super chat, which can help out the channel as well. Batasai says, "Hey guys, good to see you. Are you convinced by that a duel between Darth Vader and Darth Maul will happen in the new Maul show?" I don't know if season 1 I'm convinced, but I think it will happen at some point, yes.
I'm not entirely convinced just because the seemingly placement of it seems a little too early. Like, I don't really see the idea of him being, like, stranded on Malachor for, like, 5, 6 years, maybe, like, a year or 2. Um, and how close do we get to Rebels? Are we really trying to push it with that show? Because again, this show being called Shadow Lord, it can play on that Talon relationship or whoever this new Twilight character is, or it can play on like the underworld stuff, the stuff that he's really good at. Like that's his most successful amount of power comes with him not being a Sith, right? So is it just Crimson Dawn stuff? Is it both? Right? And that's the thing that makes me hesitant about just how far the scope of the show is really going to be or if it's just gonna be super concentrated in a couple years. Are we gonna have some repeats of the Savage Opress beats with this new character? I don't know. There's a lot of things there. Like Liam said, if this is like a show just about like what we're seeing going on, um, with him just right after the season Mandalore arc and during the same time period as Bad Batch or just a little bit past that, then maybe we open up the doors to an anthology series. Or, maybe we get like a Tales of, experience where you have him kind of like have like just an episode where Vader maybe gets 3 episodes or Maul gets 3 episodes or something, or it's split between the 2 of them as they're, like, kind of vying for stuff there. But I don't know, it would also be harder to do something like that because what we've seen from the comics there, Vader's not even, like, really in the military there per se. It'd be, like, only if he's really hunting down Maul because of his force powers, not for, like, "Oh, I'm in charge of the fleet, and I'm gonna take down enemies of Palpatine, enemies of the state," right? So, it's a tough one for me to say. Definitely not season 1. If it gets 3 seasons, I could see the very ending of season 3 if there is, like, maybe some time skips by the time we reach the 3rd season, but I don't know, that's something I almost wanna see, almost have its, like, own, like, special, like, just to see, like, what's going on there from all, like, just, like, as, like, a n feature presentation or whatever on Disney Plus, but is there enough story to do, like, 40 minutes of that? I don't know that either, so I would say, like, an end of season 3 at best.
Well, I think something that could be kind of a cool litmus test and still tie into the story of Maul is if you and Anakin, um, is if you did do a fight, early in the dark times when Vader's still getting his, robotic feet under him and he's still trying to figure out how powerful am I and how do I fight and all that. And some of the stuff we've seen in the comics, but maybe fitting in between some of the stories in the comics. And he goes up against Maul, who he's like, okay, Obi-Wan's beat this guy multiple times and he loses to Maul maybe or duels him to a draw. And he's like, oh my God, like I can't beat this guy and I lost to Obi-Wan, what's happening to me? I think that would be interesting for Vader for a little bit. And then you have their duel again, and it ends up being the one that he defeats Maul and leaves him on Malachor. Like, I think that would be kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think we saw Palpatine obviously take matters into his own hands with Maul in season 5 of the Clone Wars. If Maul makes himself and his power too big to the point where Palpatine's like, he's a rival of mine now. I've got to, and at that time too, Palpatine was confident in his choice of the Dooku apprenticeship, and then also confident that Anakin would be the successor to Dooku. Is he confident in Vader now that he's completely robotic? Does he have maybe a thought to go back to Maul, and does he pit them against each other to see who's better? That could be interesting as well for the story. And if you have Sam Witwer, I know Ian McDermott's been coming back to do Palpatine pretty much every time they've used him, even in animation recently. But Sam Witwer did Palpatine in the Clone Wars. If you already have him for Maul, maybe you use him for Palpatine as well. But I'd love to see more dark side stuff. But yeah, cool idea. Badasai also says, "I have been kind of away of the news in Star Wars. What's your view on the state of Star Wars today, and how does the future look like in your opinion?" It's definitely a loaded question, one we've kind of talk about here and there almost every stream. But I think currently the state of Star Wars is pretty positive. They ended basically the Disney Plus era of Star Wars on a very high with Andor season 2. We both loved it. Most of the critics loved it. Most audiences seem to have loved it. It's the best thing. Andor by itself is the best thing Disney Star Wars has made. And then to also follow that up with ending on a pretty high with wrapping up the High Republic, which is their first publishing initiative. Two of the Star Wars, avenues of storytelling have been ended on a pretty high as we kind of take this little hiatus until next year. So I think we're in a fairly positive place for Star Wars. If the Zero Company game comes out and it's like a smash success with critics and enough people buy it because they hear good things, we could be in a pretty good place again for Star Wars video games as well. So I think the place that obviously we're on the shakiest ground is film because we won't know until next year. And then comics are starting to regain their footing after kind of more underwhelming, lackluster ends to the last few arcs. Um, we're getting rebooted again into this new Republic era for comics and a variety of different eras. So I think Star Wars is as positive as it's probably been in a couple of years, especially because last year was such a flat year for Star Wars overall. Pretty much across the board, like books, nothing too incredible, comics, nothing too incredible, shows were some of the worst they've made, and the ones that were pretty good they made, nobody watched. So it just was last year was such a disappointing year for Star Wars. I think between Andor, High Republic ending, Revenge of the Sith re-release hype, now going into next year with all the content that's coming out next year, I think we're in a pretty good place. But obviously, it mostly hinges on the fact that Maul Shadow Lord's got to kick off animation in an incredibly engrossing new direction. Bad Batch was really good, but it didn't necessarily have the viewership. Can Maul Shadow Lord grab the viewership of like Clone Wars and Rebels and run with it and also be an excellent show? Can Mandalorian and Grogu make us, and that's the biggest one, make us feel like Star Wars is back as a theatrical franchise? Can Ahsoka season 2 really wrap up the streaming era of Star Wars with a worthwhile finale to that show, which was mixed positive but still mixed reviewed show from season 1, um, in that New Republic era, and kind of scrape together the last remnants of the New Republic TV era into the film era? And can we kickstart new directions with something like Ninth Jedi in anime, and with all these other new books and stuff coming out next year? I think 2026 is the biggest year for Star Wars. 2015, I really think, um, because we kind of had that natural bridge originally from sequels into streaming. We didn't necessarily have a lull. Mandalorian definitely, kickstarted or kind of revived Star Wars a little bit from maybe where it would have gone had we just ended with Rise of Skywalker. But then the rest of the streaming era of Star Wars has been such a roller coaster that it's kind of hard to say that this era has been a complete success or even a moderate success. So it is really since 2015 when Disney relaunched theatrical Star Wars. This 2026 is probably the biggest year for Star Wars yet, and hopefully, I'm hopeful that they will launch in a good direction. But I think right now, generally, people are positive about Star Wars for the first time in about a year overall, and I think that positivity is a good way to enter next year as we enter into this very important crux year for Star Wars.
Yeah, I agree with all you're saying there. It is positive, but it is almost sad that we don't get to see continuation into the back half of the year. Like if we had Maul Shadow Lord kind of come out in November or October, you could kind of bridge it, put a book or two there, and then bam, all right. We've satisfied enough fans. Let's just coast through the summer and bam, here we go. Here's the next big thing. It's not there. It's not really gonna be there until the start of next year, and because it's gonna be the start of the year, less people are really gonna have time or be as interested in animation. We've seen that with our own reviews of, like, Bad Batch season 2 and season 3, like, it builds up to something bigger. That's always gonna be the case with TV shows, especially animation, but with the way that Disney Plus era is ending, right, we're not gonna get shows as expensive as Andor. Probably never gonna get that writing to that level again. We're trying to move away from, like, all these mini series, which are conversions of film scripts like Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Whatever's gonna be relatively the same and be pumped out more is probably gonna be animation. They might have for a little bit of period of time there before they figure out how to truly make show run proper shows that continue for multiple seasons that are shows, not just here's one story, then here's the next story. Will be like Small Shadow Lord. What comes after that, who knows? I mean, I think we're both of the opinion that we can still do maybe like one anthology show that can kinda connect that bridge between the end of the prequels and the beginning of the original trilogy. But once you do that, frankly, the era should be closed. Like, we've done
Yeah.
so much. Disney has done so much and done it really well. Do not get us wrong, has done it really well, but, like, maybe focus on the things that you're trying to, like, transition away from streaming, right, and flesh out that stuff with animation, flesh that stuff out with books and all that. I know Filoni loves to control his characters, but I don't think Favreau necessarily has the same issues, like, flesh out some backstory that he can pull from and all that. There's things that you can do, especially once you start moving things towards movies, less runtime. This is where other stories like animation and books can comics can thrive and prosper again. So, I expect animation to actually get a bit of a foothold again. It's just gonna be way cheaper to develop overall. They can keep the same style, even though I do want them to move to anime, move into a whole new animation style to just keep things fresh and only use this for like the tales of stuff. But it's so well mastered at this point that like use that as a base and then maybe stylize it more and then call it new or whatever. So that's how I look at that coming. I think we're leading to a good year. We're not like 2023 where we're trying to connect Dawn of the Jedi, Ahsoka, and Rey's New Jedi Order into like, oh, here's the next big thing. Now we're just like, let's finish the Mandoverse properly. Let's elevate it up. It might be a little late here, but if we semi reboot it and then bring out multimedia from it instead of just relying on the show and a couple of art books, I think people will get re-energized for it. It might never be as peak as it was, but that peak ended in 2021, basically. Like there was just nothing to really ever touch the hype of the season 2 finale, and you can't blame them, right? Like it's hard to beat Luke Skywalker showing up and saving the day. That's just a fact. But you still need a build up towards Thrawn, and it's just what Marvel is facing right now too. Like, yeah, Fantastic Four is gonna do better than Thunderbolts. Is it gonna be a huge success, especially with it being so close to Superman? Right now, it's looking like it might even miss 600,000,000. It might barely stay over 600,000,000 because it's gonna have like a pretty lengthy August and things are just gonna be stretched out more and more. And they might just keep it in theaters like how Brave New World was. But you kinda have to earn audience trust. Star Wars fans, even if you loved or hated 8, it still did a good amount of money. 9, it did money, but people were like, "Okay, what the hell?" And Disney just was having a crazy 2019 that everything was a billion-dollar film. They're now so far removed from making a movie that this has to be 500, 600,000,000. It's like a Star Trek movie from the '90s. We're using the next generation sets, dressing them up and making the original series cast older and in movies just kinda like having some continuity with technology and all that, right? Like, that's they are gonna save a lot of money on this film. If it makes 500, 600,000,000, I think that's gonna be a big dub. I'm sure people are gonna spin and be like, "Oh, nobody cares about Star Wars," but this is a great way to start off things by having something that is not expensive. Starfighter, if it has good momentum from what we see in Mandalorian Grogu, that's gonna be the real test of it, and I think it can do well, but it's also the first real story, like Liam brought up before, that isn't connected to anything from another Star Wars movie or a big Star Wars initiative, right? Rogue One still has everything tied to a plot point in A New Hope. Solo Star Wars story is Han Solo's origin, right? Starfighter, it's completely new. It's gonna be post-sequel, right? So it's gonna be less popular than something post a new Return of the Jedi just because there's less fans of that because it's a much newer thing versus the defining trilogy of Star Wars, right? So I'm hoping Mandalorian Grogu does 500, 600, and then we get Starfighter making around that much, 600, 700. Star Wars films did not make $1 billion back in the day. Yes, unadjusted, sure. Adjusted probably does make closer to a billion, but that's okay. We needed the gaps anyway. Let's see if we can have individual stories actually thrive for once. Is this gonna be this restart of the, Star Wars stories line? I don't think so. I just think whatever story makes sense, they're gonna make it, and then we're gonna get Rey's New Jedi Order at some point because they're gonna try to, have her cameo in Starfighter or something like that and build out this post-sequel era. Well, I think we're just kinda done in general in all pop culture from having billion-dollar guaranteed franchises anymore, but making 600 to 800 is nothing to scoff at, especially if you're smart about your money, smart about your writing, smart about doing your post-production and locking all your shots in well before instead of trying to edit and fix everything in post like Star Wars has done, and especially Marvel has done. It might not be as pretty, but I think we're gonna enter a good flow state here if they just play it smart like they've seemingly started to show with the MCU.
Well, I think the thing that's going to be most interesting is superhero movies were almost always guaranteed billion-dollar movies because of how popular they were internationally and how popular, especially, they were in China. And right now, we're seeing between Superman and Fantastic Four, Thunderbolts, Captain America, pretty much everything superhero that's come out recently has bombed in China. And internationally, they just haven't been as well received. So, where does Star Wars fit in? Star Wars is a franchise that always has had done less box office in China. So in some ways, you're more reliant on the domestic box office. So if you can get domestic fans, Americans and Canadians, which is the domestic box office, when you calculate it, if you could get them on board with Star Wars again, then you Star Wars is a little bit easier path to success than maybe the MCU or DCU because the bulk of Star Wars box office has always come from North America. Um, that's going to be interesting to track, and it will be interesting to see how well The Mandalorian has played overseas as an IP because we know what it's like here. How well has it played overseas as a notable name in Star Wars because we saw declines domestically and internationally for Star Wars across the sequel trilogy. Force Awakens is an anomaly. Like no movie will catch Force Awakens or not for a long time with the records it put up in terms of domestic box office. But Last Jedi had diminishing returns from there, and then Rise of Skywalker was significantly diminishing from Last Jedi. Where does Mandalorian fit in? Because it's such a completely different IP and it's something that's never been tested in terms of theatrical business. And we can kind of, guesstimate that it will probably have at least $100 million opening weekend, 90 to $100 million opening weekend in the United States and Canada. Will it have that same type of traditional success overseas? I think that's the big one because is the brand we've seen brand trust almost just completely evaporate for the MCU overseas, even more so than over here. Will that brand trust also have evaporated for Star Wars, or will it just be then a case of? And I think Disney is kind of hoping for this. Will it be the case of well, there hasn't been a Star Wars movie in theaters in 7 years? We got to go see it. It doesn't matter who's, involved in it. And I think that might be what they're hoping for is like, maybe you watch Disney Plus, maybe you didn't. Forget about all that and forget about the sequels a little bit. This is a whole new thing. And it's the first Star Wars movie in 7 years. Come see it. And I think that's what they're going for. And technically, Force Awakens was our first Star Wars movie in 7 years, if you count the Clone Wars movie as well. So it's about that gap for Star Wars when they've taken breaks since the prequel started, and we shall see how it goes. But I think we're going to have to wrap it up there tonight. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you had some questions that we didn't get to answer, make sure you save them, bring them for next stream. We'll be back next Tuesday as well. Same time, same place. Make sure you join us here. Keep an eye on the channel for all the other content coming out. Make sure you check out all the videos we've been posting, all the shorts we've been posting, the polls twice a day, every day. Polls I've started to change up some of the polls a little bit, trying some new formats as well. So make sure you keep an eye out on that as well. Make sure you bring your questions, your comments, your theories next week. Subscribe to our Patreon or YouTube membership programs if you're interested. There's a lot of great perks there. You can subscribe for as little as 99 cents a month, helps out the channel. And you get some perks and some badges and stuff like that for the streams. If you subscribe at the $5 tier or higher, you get priority chat access. So check that out if you are interested. If you are just finding us on replay, make sure you join us every week for our live streams and Q&As where you can ask your own questions and see what our responses are and directly interact with us. If you're watching right now and you haven't liked the video, make sure you hit the like button. There are more people right now watching that have liked the video, so make sure you do so. Subscribe to the channel if you are new as well, and comment below if you're watching on replay and let us know what you thought of some of the topics from this week. Thank you so much for watching this stream, everybody, and we will see you all next week for the next live stream and Q&A.